On this episode of Still Loading, we discovered we all grew up in the same orphanage. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and it is the second episode for the winter of Final Fantasy. We are going to be talking about Final Fantasy VIII. Now, why, you may ask? I don't know if I even said this in the Final 9 episode, so just in case this is someone's first episode, or the fact that I forgot to say it in the Final 9, we're just going to kill two birds with one stone. I'm doing Final Fantasy 9, 8, and then 7 instead of going in the proper order because I've tried to do this whole thing before of reliving my childhood Final Fantasies, which were my formative ones, Final 7, 8, and 9. And I did this before I had the podcast, and I played through 7 real fast. Got 10 hours into 8 and then never went any further in 8 and never got to 9. So I figured for the show, I would start with 9, which would force me to end with 7. So that way if I could just muscle my way through 8, and that's not an indictment of 8, just to be clear. I don't want that as a hint of my feelings on this game. It's just a bit more slower pace compared to 9 and 7 in my opinion. But we will find out about all of these opinions on Final Fantasy VIII because this is going to be a wild and crazy episode. With me today is two esteemed guests. One is a brand new guest to the show, and the other is a returning guest. So first, with my new guest, I have Bill from the Gaming and Collecting podcast. Bill, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
That's great to hear. I'm glad to have you on. It's been a long time coming. I've been trying to have you on the show for a little bit, so I'm glad to finally get you on. And my returning guest, Try from My Life in Gaming. Try, how are you, my friend?
Doing excellent. Glad to be here again after the Final Fantasy draft. That was one of the most fun things I've ever recorded.
Oh, there's going to be another one at some point. I don't know when. I don't know where, but we will have another Final Fantasy. I feel like you can almost do a yearly thing and just kind of change up the rules slightly and see, maybe swap in some guests here and there, just like mix and match. But that's a discussion for another day. I have brought both of you here to talk about Final Fantasy VIII, and I was actually telling you both off mic. I think it's kind of amusing. I didn't notice it until after I had already scheduled everything. All of these Winter of Final Fantasy episodes features a guest who was on the Final Fantasy draft. That is a tongue twister. Who was on the draft, and a brand new guest. Last week was Game Dave from the Final Fantasy draft, and then it was another Dave from Tales from the Backlog. And this week, Try from the draft, and obviously Bill, you're brand new. So I'm so happy to have both of you on this episode. And before we dive in to talk about this game in earnest, as I usually say all the time, I would like the listeners and myself to get to know a little bit more about you by talking. I want to hear from each of you what your personal experiences were with Final Fantasy VIII. Try, let's start off with you. How did you first discover Final Fantasy VIII? And just tell me a little bit of your background with it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the funny thing about the day that Final Fantasy VIII came out, that is something I always forget, is it was actually the same day that the Dreamcast came out.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Yes,
okay.
99.99. I mean, Sega was pushing that hard, but because me and my friends at that time, we weren't really Sega people, like that wasn't so much on my radar. My friends were much more excited about Final Fantasy VIII. I remember there was, it might be easy for some people to forget with as divisive of an entry as it is, but there was a tremendous amount of hype at the time for this game. I mean, I remember, people who were not like necessarily the big gamer people at school, like they played Final Fantasy VII, and like Final Fantasy VIII looked like Final Fantasy VII, except the characters were always like full size, like they were in the battles of Final Fantasy VII, and it was 4 discs instead of 3. Like this was major hype. And one of my closest gaming buddies bought it day one, and I remember going to his house and watching the beginning of the game up through at least like where you get, I think it's Siren in the
Okay.
in the opening sort of the exam or whatever they call it.
Yep.
Yes, the
so
seed
yeah,
exam.
yes. So I remember that, and I don't think I know I didn't have my own PlayStation at the time, because the first game that I got for it was actually Final Fantasy Anthology, which came out like just a few weeks after Final Fantasy VIII.
Okay.
Cool.
So yeah, this was over time, like as I knew more about the game, I was kind of like I hadn't really played it for myself, but it's just from talking to other people, talking to my friends, seeing a bit of my friend playing it as I went back to his house and saw snippets of the game. There were a lot of things where I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this one. The big thing that was on my mind was how you enemies level up with you. And
yes.
I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. What's the point of leveling? So there was a lot of uncertainty. And then I believe it was early the following year. It must have been early 2000, because this came out in September 99. I got my own PlayStation. And I remember when a friend visited who had lived nearby and moved away, and then he came and visited, and we went to Funko Land, and
rest in peace.
Yes, I know. Glorious days those were.
I think I'm too
but we
young to remember.
we weren't there buying used games. We bought new games, and he got Suikoden 2, which was the smarter financial move, because that game became very difficult to find shortly thereafter.
I legit was trying to find a copy of even the original Suikoden the other week, because I got as a gift a gift card to my local retro game store, and they didn't even have a copy. I don't know if I would have been able to afford it, mind you, but I was hoping. They're hard to find.
Yeah. So I bought Final Fantasy VIII when we were at the store. So those were the two games we bought, because I was like, at that point I had played at least 6, 7, and 5. Yeah, 5 by that point. So I was like, well, I'm a little unsure about this one, but I gotta get it. I gotta play through this. And once I had it for myself, this is, getting close to a year after release. I played through it and I'm like, you know what? I really like this one, actually. Like I was unsure, but I came to really love it, and I've loved it ever since.
Nice.
All right, Bill, let me hear from you. What was your experience with Final Fantasy VIII, and how did you first discover it? You said we talked about a bit off mic that you have a unique experience with this game, so I'd love to hear a bit more about it.
So, when this game came out, I was like only 4 years old, so I'm pretty young for the time of this game. So I didn't really, yeah. So I had at the time we had a family PlayStation, like me and my sister Alex. So and we kind of shared that between us. And I remember like no one could shut up about Final Fantasy VII back in the day. Like it was the PlayStation game to own. So I remember like I would like visit a couple friends' houses back in the day, and they all had 7. And I remember seeing like 7 was like constantly on the TV, and I always remember kind of watching. I kind of experienced that game initially through other people's PlayStations, so
almost vicariously,
in a degree, yeah. And to the point where when we finally got our PlayStation, the one me and my sister Alex would share, when it came to like getting games, of course, like we had like some crappy licensed games, and Crash 3 actually was one of the games that I played the most of. But after experiencing 7 for the longest time, I desperately, like, that was the next game I wanted. So I remember it was Christmas of 2000, I want to say. I remember asking my parents for Final Fantasy VII, or what I thought I was saying. me being a kid wrote it down, but trying to be like trying to be very mature was like, I'm going to write the Roman numeral. Little did I know, I wrote an 8 instead of a 7. And that Christmas morning, I remember opening up the package, and I was expecting to see Cloud holding the Buster Sword, and instead I saw these 3 people I had never seen before. And I was only upset about it for 3 seconds because I was like, yeah, it's a Final Fantasy, who cares? So Final Fantasy VIII I ended up with because my 5-year-old brain decided tried to be adult and screwed up the Roman numerals. But
lucky for you, it's always a different world, different characters.
Yeah. The funny part is, though, if I had just said Final Fantasy, I could have very well ended up with like 9 or something, because 9 was out at that point. But because I specified what I thought 7, but actually 8, I ended up getting 8 instead. And I remember, so this was like I said, I had set off Mike, actually. This would actually be my first RPG experience ever. And boy, what a place to start for a beginner.
Seriously.
Yeah, no kidding.
This is not a friendly entry point in for an RPG.
Although it is very tutorial heavy, but those tutorials seem to not drill themselves into a lot of people very well.
It's tutorial heavy, but it's like the tutorial somehow makes the game more confusing at times.
100%. I never understood what the fuck they're talking about.
Which I love and hate at the same time. But because I was so young, like, obviously this game took me years to beat. Like, I didn't officially beat 8 until like 2006, I want to say. So it took me a good like maybe like 6 years to beat this game. But
I was gonna say, you said you were 5 when you got this. Could you even read? I'm not even trying to say that to be mean, but like, like 5-year-olds aren't even in kindergarten yet. Like, kindergartners can barely know letters. At least, who knows? Actually, you know what? It's been a while since I've been in kindergarten. I've been hearing stories about how school now is like crazy advanced for kids. So who knows? Maybe kids are already reading at 5 years old.
So I could read, but not very well. Like, there was a lot of words that I was like, I don't know what that means. I'm just kind of mash through the cutscenes and just run around on the overworld.
You know what? I think 8 probably would have been one of the better things for you to start with, only for this reason. It has some of the best visuals and cutscenes from a Final Fantasy game on the PS1, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And the best, I don't know if this is controversial, but the best Final Fantasy soundtrack.
That's actually a pretty popular opinion, and I agree with you.
I was of that opinion until I played it again. For this episode, there's a handful of like really good songs, and then the rest I just don't care about. Like Final 9, it never felt intrusive. With Final 8, I always kind of was like, either I really like the song, or it was honestly just like taking away from my experience. But that's just my the thing is, like, I don't know. It is a good soundtrack though. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad one. I just don't know if it was as well. I'm conflicted with it, so I don't know. We'll get to it.
My one criticism with that is, I'm sorry for getting off track here, but is that there's no clear main theme. Yes, there's Eyes on Me, but before 8, the main theme was always the world map theme. But Blue Fields is clearly not the game's main theme. It only appears on the overworld. So that always bugged me. That it's like, wait, the overworld music is not the game's main theme. That was inconsistent with the rest of the series. So that, you know what? That aspect bugs me. And there's no character themes either. Like, no, there's not. The main characters don't have character themes, which everyone in Final Fantasy VI had. Most characters in Final Fantasy VII had. Final Fantasy VIII, no character themes. But outside of that, man, the soundtrack is great.
Every character in 7 does have a theme. They're just not all named the character's theme.
Does Cloud have a theme?
Yeah, his theme is technically the overworld theme.
Okay.
I think
one's cheat.
I think you hit the nail on the head though with that try, because Final Fantasy VII, I'm playing through it now. You know, it has that overworld theme is iconic. Like, you can hum it wherever you go. Final Fantasy IX has a pretty decent overworld theme too.
Oh yeah, 9 especially utilizes it, like the motifs from the main theme, like more liberally throughout the game and the soundtrack than any prior entry.
But then with 8, like you're saying, Blue Fields is just not pizz. Is it pizzicato is the musical term? But strings just going bum 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 bum.
I guess you could say that the soundtrack lacks thematic cohesion, but every track, I mean, maybe not every track, but like almost all the tracks I love. Like just something about the tone of them. I remember at the time it was criticized for sounding rather electronic. Uematsu had not really updated his sound samples too much.
That does baffle me a little though, because 7 sounds so artificial it's not even funny. 8 was the first one to truly...
I think people at that time were expecting more and more and more from the PlayStation. But to me, like, that electronic soundtrack is part of Uematsu. So that has never been a downside to the soundtrack for me.
For me, the soundtrack was always kind of like, it's one of those like soundtracks that I feel like you gain a real appreciation for if you listen to it like independently from the game. Like, I actually have like imported over like the soundtrack in like 2 variations. I have the actual like jewel case version, and I have this like booklet that like opens up and has like all these like notes and pictures and stuff.
I think for me, Final 8 kind of has like, there's a couple of songs that are just absolute bangers, and then there's a bunch that are just forgettable. Like Liberi Fatality is so good. It is like that intro to the song on the intro cinematic is so good. I also love Balam Gardens theme. That doesn't get that old to me. I also like the Triple Triad music. Eyes on Me is really fun. But those are the only ones I can like name. I couldn't name other songs. I granted, to be fair. Sorry, what?
Man with the Machine Gun?
Is that do 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 do? No, that's a battle theme.
Yeah, that's Laguna's theme. And Fisherman's Horizon, I think, is the best town music in the series.
It's up there.
Really?
Perhaps in all of maybe not all RPGs, because some of the stuff in Chrono Cross is pretty amazing. But that's I'd say Fisherman's Horizon is my favorite town theme of the series. Yeah,
my favorite version of the Chocobo theme is in this game.
Chocobo theme in this one never really lit me on fire,
you only hear it for like 5 seconds because there's like only one real point where you actually get chocobos.
Okay, Bill, is there anything more that you wanted to add about your childhood experience? Or
I apologize.
I feel like we cut you off with it.
We were just like, soundtrack. Let's talk about soundtrack.
No, it's
a great soundtrack.
Honestly, like that game, like that was during a time like because I was so young and like you really couldn't get a lot of games then because you'd get one maybe like once a year for like a birthday present or a Christmas present. So little did I know, like that was like the perfect game for me because that game literally lasted me 6 years. And like I never like had a dull moment with it, even though it was incredibly frustrating for like the first 3.
Did you restart it multiple times over those 6 years as you like got a better understanding of reading and things like that?
I'd get to points where I'd basically be like soft locked in and I just could not progress because I did not know how to plan out I didn't plan out how 8 works because I did a lot of grinding, which you're not supposed to do. So
no,
and it would basically kill all my runs and I'd have to restart multiple times.
For me, or actually, sorry, Bill. One last. Is there anything left to go over? I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off any further.
Yeah, that's pretty much about it.
All right, cool. I just wanted to double check. So for me, with Final Fantasy VIII, I first experienced it shortly after 7. Now, the way that I remember this game, Final Fantasy VIII was my favorite Final Fantasy for a number of years. I loved it because the visuals were really captivating. It felt very cinematic, especially compared to Final Fantasy VII and even to Final 9, which I hadn't played when I first played this. It felt super cinematic. I really liked Nomura's character designs in this. Like, I'm looking, even though Squall is wearing like 7 fucking belts around his waist.
Hey, I dig that style.
I do like his outfit, but it's very Nomura in a very fun way. So that was always kind of amusing to me. But I loved the visuals. The cinematics were captivating. Like I actually, I used to make Final Fantasy music videos. Like I would take the FMVs from the game. I found a program online that could rip them from the game discs, and I would actually like. And I would make little music videos. There's a couple still up on YouTube, which I'm not going to shout out because I'm embarrassed by them. Not that they're actually that bad, but some of them are like there was one I did. There's a song by a Christian artist. His name is just Tim. He's this Korean Christian artist, and the song is called Morning Star. I'll never forget this video, not because of the religious content, but because of the religious content. Some weird ass dude, and I guess this is why Final 8 lingers in my head so much, because I did so much with it outside of the game too. This dude, creepiest YouTube name I've ever heard, and he still has a YouTube channel, so I don't know if I want to like put it. I'm not going to say the name. He had a really creepy username though, and legitimately sounded like a pedophile in his username. That's all I'll say. And he sent me he commented this long paragraph about how Jesus is Satan, because in the Bible, it mentions that Satan is the morning star, and it mentions that Christ is the morning star, and the song that I used was called Morning Star. So he went on this these paragraph long tangents of like why Jesus is Satan. And me, as like a young, much more religious person than I am now, I was like, what is he talking about? This makes no sense. So I did some research, and the funny thing is he quoted a bunch of Bible verses using a specific version of the Bible, like, you know, the New International Version, whatever the heck, you know, whichever specific version it is. So I replied back with quotes from the same version refuting everything, and he's like, that's mindless Christian propaganda. And I'm like, but I'm using the same source. Like, I don't know what your problem is with this. It was such a wild experience.
I just use Libri Fatale, however you say it, and didn't share my Final Fantasy VIII FMV edit online, so I didn't get none of that.
See, I was just the edgelord that every video was like Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace, like every other person online at the time.
I went from one, like I did Morningstar, because Morningstar, like even though it's a Christian song, it felt like a love song, so it was a lot of stuff with like Squall and Renoa and trying to show the romance between the two. But then I would use like Dragon Force for another one, like nice. Power metal, just complete polar opposites of everything. Oh my god! But the Final Fantasy had such great cinematics. Like, I love the cinematics of the game. I really enjoyed the story. Up to this day. Yeah, they do,
and it blends. It does some really neat blending of gameplay leading straight into the FMV, where sometimes the actual polygon characters are overlaid on the FMV as it makes that transition.
And it
really
works
seamless.
Yeah, it works better than it should. Like sometimes when the polygon characters are on top of the FMV for too long, it gets a little like
they're a little jittery.
It gets a little janky. But overall, that doesn't happen often, and the times that it doesn't really take away from the game all that much. Then what I was going to say was. I love the game. I loved all the story. I loved the characters when I first played it. And I actually played through it originally with a strategy guide. I had the official FF8 strategy guide, and I had never played through a game with the strategy guide from start to finish like I did with Final Fantasy VIII back when I was a kid. And I think that honestly, with a lot of the frustrations that people have with the battle system, the reason I didn't is because I had the strategy guide to help me out. And
here's the David Cassidy version.
Yes, I actually tried to find David Cassidy online because I wanted to interview him. But that's a fairly common-ish name, so I'm trying to like search David Cassidy on Twitter. And I'm like, I don't know what he even looks like, so I can't. I don't know.
Yeah, I still have my original strategy guide as well. Like this thing is
Prima one.
Yeah, it was Prima.
Brady Games.
Yeah. Brady Games. You're right.
Brady Games. Yep.
I don't think I ever got the 8 one, but I remember borrowing it for a while from a friend, but I can't remember if I I at the time, I very much kind of tried to have a rule about playing through a game without the strategy guide, but because, I was a kid with all the time in the world, I just assumed that there would be multiple playthroughs of the game, and I would use the strategy guide on the second playthrough to like get all the stuff, but didn't worry about on the first playthrough. But at the same time, I think so much of the stuff that people said about Final Fantasy VIII kind of scared me, like because everyone gets stuck on the Adele fight because no one knew how to junction, even though it's actually quite easy. But no one knew how to junction, so everyone hits a brick wall at the Adele fight on disc 4. And so I think I was scared of some things, so I may have used it a little bit, but I definitely remember looking at my friend's copy of that guide quite a bit, but I don't think I was like really following it when I played through the game, like for myself for the first time.
The guide's pretty nice because what it does is that each area that you go to, it gives you a list of all the draw points that are available in that area. And we'll explain the draw points in a little bit. I don't want to go too much into that for those who have not played Final 8. And actually, we'll put the story at the end. I'm going to take a page out of Tales from the Backlog, and we're going to put a spoiler wall up at the end because I'd like to talk. Well, there's going to be mild spoilers throughout this, but we'll actually spoil more of the story towards the end of the episode. So we'll explain the draw system and all the battle stuff in a little bit, but it would list all the draw points for all the different spells, and then it also would list the rare cards that you could get. Could you get for Triple Triad, which was super helpful because those cards were freaking great. And they were also super handy because later on you get an ability to turn those cards into items, and the rare cards had the best items. So there was a lot of really cool stuff like that. Like there's one that you could get like 100 heroes, which for heroes gives you basically the aura spell in an item, and we'll get into what the aura spell is overpowered as hell. I love aura so goddamn much. That's how I beat you. That's the easiest way to beat the final boss is with aura, but we'll get to that. But yeah, so it lists all the draw points, it lists the locations of the save points, it would tell you which type of enemies you would face. The only real it actually was laid out pretty well. It would give you a list of steps for you to complete, first do this, then this, then this. But then underneath it, the steps were very quick. It was maybe like a quarter of one page of the section that you're in. But then the rest of the section, like for example, I actually have the guide open in front of me and I'm looking at the Seed Field Exam page. It has 9 steps and it tells you all 9 right there. But underneath all that and on the following pages, it has little things like you're being graded. Here's what you need to do to keep in mind for this seed test. Here's how it would basically go through very specific aspects of that area that like wouldn't fit into necessarily a quick step by step, but it expands upon everything. The only issue I have with that there is they don't really list those things always in order. So sometimes you'd be playing, it basically encourages you to read the whole section first and then go follow the step by step, so that way you don't miss anything as you're going through the step by step. That was really my only criticism with it, but it was still a fantastic strategy guide. It really helped me get through the game and deal with a lot of the issues of not understanding the junction system, which I think is a good transition to talk about the battle system and the junction system of this game. I think,
oh boy,
I had this theory as a kid, and I don't think it's really held up as an adult, but I had a theory that like each Final Fantasy had one element that like doesn't mean that the rest are bad, but like one element that you're just like, it's above and beyond. Like they really went all out on this one specific thing, and it shows. For me in like Final 7, I always felt like it was the story. For Final 9, I kind of thought it was the world building, and for Final 8, it's the battle system. And I think the world building is actually really good in Final 8 too, but like the battle system is so interesting and intricate. So I think a real basic overview of it, and then I want to hear both of your thoughts on the battle system, what you liked, what you didn't like. But for the listeners, a real basic overview. Unlike other Final Fantasies where you have a MP bar or a magic points bar, you don't have that at all in this. You can get spells and you literally have them like they're an item in your inventory. And you can have up to 100 of any given spell. You have a limit of how much you can store, just like you would have an item limit. But you have a limit of how many spells you can store, but you can have up to 100 of them. The way you get spells is either by finding draw points on the map, which are just little bubbles that you see, and they have a specific spell for each one. So like in the main area, in like the opening area called Balam Garden, there's like a cure one. There is actually, you know what? Let me resort to the strategy guide that I had.
I like how we both have the guide open right now.
It's super handy. It has Cure, Isuna, and Blizzard spells. And when you go up to a draw point, when you go up to a draw point, it would give you a random number of that spell. So if you went up to the Cure one, you could get up between 1 and, I don't know, I've seen up to 15. I'm sure maybe even higher, depending on it. The other places that you would get spells is from enemies. And the way you would do that is you have an ability called Draw, and there's a little bit more complexity on how you get that ability in your battle menu in your battle commands. But you select Draw in the middle of a battle, you select an enemy, and they have a list of different spells that you can draw from them, and every enemy is different. So early on, you might see Fire, Blizzard, Cure, Sleep, Poison, if you're maybe, stuff like that. And then you draw a spell, and once again, it's a random number. It could be 1 to, I've seen up, 10 or 12 sometimes, or maybe 9 actually.
You can grind it out to 100 in one battle as long as you can survive.
Yeah, and really that's what you want to do in the early game, because the enemies don't do a lot of damage, and you can really just grind it out.
I mean, of course, that depends on someone's tolerance for grinding. I tend to do it, yes, but I wouldn't say that that's like how you have to play, because that might discourage some people from playing. You certainly don't, because like I said, I think a lot, I can't count the times I've heard of people getting to disc 4 and they didn't really understand how to use magic junctioning.
Yeah.
And that's
so obviously people got very far playing the game very poorly, but
you can get far, but you will eventually soft lock yourself.
Yes.
And so the reason why you have to draw spells isn't just to use them. What we keep talking about junctioning, and what that means is that the junction system is basically you're equipping a magic spell to one of your character's attributes. And by attributes, it's the standard Dungeons and Dragons look, your strength, your HP, your vitality, which they are 2 different things in this, magic, your spirit, your hit ratio, like how easy it is for you to hit, stuff like luck as well, like things like that. It has your individual character abilities. So if you junction, say, Fire to your strength will go from a level of 10 to maybe a level of 15. I'm just throwing out random numbers, and then the more of that spell you have, the larger that boost will be. So if you put 5 fires into your strength stat, it will go up, but it'll go up even more if you have a full stock of 100 fires or 100 of whatever spell you junction to it. And that there's a crucial component that I'm not explaining, but just for the time being, that's what it is in a nutshell. That you have to draw magic from enemies or from the world around it, or you could even get it by, like we said, there's some cards you can get, and there's other like more obscure ways to get magic spells, but for all intents and purposes, you get it
items.
From items.
They are items essentially.
Yeah. that's confusing. There's an item list and a magic list, and the magic this is a little confusing. So I try to I'm not going to talk about how Guardian Forces allow you to do different things, and we'll explain. Guardian Forces are your summons. They are crucial to the junction system, but to make it easier for people who have never played this game before without going into the intricacies of it, you junction magic you basically equip magic to different stats. The magic will boost those stats, and certain magic spells are better for specific magic stats. So like Fire is really good for strength, but it might not be good for your luck, stuff like that. And way
it doesn't necessarily impact the element of your attack unless you also have the ability to junction to an element to an attack or a status effect to attacks, which I feel like this was, I could be wrong on this, but this was the first time I was aware of a Final Fantasy game where you could really use status effects on bosses like pretty reliably.
Yeah. I would junction 100 sleep to my character's attack, so that way every time they attack, there was a really high chance of putting the boss to sleep.
This is I would say the earliest Final Fantasy where status effect spells are actually pretty useful.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. And
this game's battle system is interesting because it literally is, so many things about it are all like commonplace nowadays in RPGs. It was like very ahead of its time.
I think the last thing I want to say before we kind of just dive really sink our teeth into this battle system is just, once again, listeners, you draw spells from the locations we said, like from enemies or from the world. You have to literally stock them up. And then you equip them to different attributes, and that in essence is the junction system. And then, like Tri said, there's the extra things on top of it of you can junction some of those status spells, like poison or sleep or confuse. You can actually equip them to your attack. So if you have a chance on your attack to do that spell, even though you're not actually physically casting it, it's really incredible. And the final thing to mention is Guardian Forces. Guardian Forces are your summons, and it'd be so confusing to actually go into how the Guardian Force system works in this, but for all intents and purposes, Guardian Forces are what allows you to equip spells to your attributes, and you can level up your summons, and they have HP because when you try to summon them, they literally blot over your health bar. And they literally take the hit for you. So if a summon has 3,000 hit points, if it takes a while to summon it and it loses all of its health before you can summon it, then you don't summon it. So it's nice because they literally they fight in your stead, or they take the hits for you while you're waiting for it to summon. But then you also run the risk of it getting killed. So that's pretty much Guardian Forces in a very, very condensed nutshell. Bill and Tri, I know there's a lot more to it, but for the sake
I would like to say, while you're talking about the summons, I think this is the best application of summons in the entire series.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think this is the perfect thing. Guys, I want to hear from you about the system. I've gone on long enough about trying to simplify it down into a very condensed nutshell. Bill, since we started with Tri before, I want to hear from you first, and then just let's see where this conversation goes. So let's talk about the battle system. Bill, let's start off with you.
So this game's battle system is fascinating, like especially when you go into it, like especially after playing, say, like Final Fantasy VII or like 6 or even 9. At first, like glance, a lot of things about this game's battle system come off as very counterintuitive. Because one thing we kind of glossed over is another key aspect to this game's combat is enemies. Well, we mentioned it earlier. Enemies actually level up with your character. So a very common strat for this game is actually to not fight enemies like ever and just stay as low level as possible.
But don't bosses have a minimum level, if I recall correctly?
They do. There is a bit, but
yeah.
Actually no, because I believe the minimum level is 1. Like that's why there's players who will go to the final boss with at level 1, because the final boss, I can tell you right now, I have the strategy guide. Actually, I'm sorry, they don't tell you Ultimecia's that's the final boss. Spoiler alert, I guess, for the for the story, but we'll go with the hardest boss in the game, the Omega Weapon, the secret hidden boss. Level 1 for that, it has 111,000 health. Level 100, it has over 1 million.
I mean, it does feel like levels are kind of an extraneous, I guess you could say, a vestigial gameplay element. It's like they give you so much power to augment every single stat in the game the way you want. It just kind of feels like levels are there because you expect levels to be there.
I feel like they were just put in because every other RPG at the time pretty much had levels.
Yeah. Aside from, ironically, I mean, Final Fantasy II.
Well, 2 is its own. 2 is kind of like 8 before 8.
Yeah.
No,
2 is its own mess.
No, what's weird though about levels in this game, they're almost used as a punishment for poor play. Like the worse you are at the game, the more you're going to level up. And by doing that, it makes the game harder, which is really strange when you think about it. Like,
I always joke. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I always joke that the optimal way to play Final Fantasy VIII is you run into every battle, draw your magic, and then run away.
Yeah.
100%. That's how you play.
Because the bosses don't give you experience.
No, they give you guardian points, I think.
The ability points for your
now the Guardian
summons.
Forces leveling up does make sense, and it does expand the abilities that you have to do with each Guardian Force. Like they expand the number of stats that you can junction to. They expand other abilities. I think they might have some just general bonuses and buffs. I forget exactly what.
Diablo's has an encounter none bonus where you can literally put that on and never fight a random battle, which I remember when I first played it, I was like, why would I even do that? Don't you want to fight battles to level up? But no, it's super fucking helpful because you don't have to fight anything.
I have never personally though like actively avoided fights. Like I fight what I come across in the game, and it's never put me in a situation, especially like if you do a good job of grinding up good spells and junctioning them to your stats. It's never put me in a position where I felt like anything was needlessly difficult. And in fact, I've played through the entire game, at least 3 or 4 times. And I always, at the end of the game, get everyone to level 100 because it's pretty easy to do with one of Quistis's limit breaks. And so that's just like that kind of, and then from that point kind of just ensures everything is a level playing field, for your party, for the enemies. I've always, maybe not my first time through, but like after that, because it's so easy, I've always gotten to 100. So I don't know. I guess, that was the big thing that I was kind of unsure about on the game. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I like that before I played the game. And then I realized that if you just don't really think about that, and at least for me, if you don't think about it and you don't unwisely grind or anything, it doesn't get in the way, but it also is like, why'd you even include levels? That's the worst. That is the worst thing about the gameplay in this game is the fact that levels exist, but they still don't ruin the game.
So you had mentioned Diablos. Can we talk about Diablos real quick?
Well, real quick, I wanted to say one other thing about that I think is a flaw of the battle system. It actively discourages you from using magic because you have to junction it to your attributes.
That is also true. And that's I guess one of the reasons why summoning is so useful in the game, because
your elemental stuff.
Yeah, and you can also get an ability where it's really obscurely implemented, but it's great if you know how to use it though. You can get an ability called Boost for Guardian Forces, where if you hold the select button, it hides the user interface, and the square button appears, and you mash the square button to increase the power of the attack. That, even though it's like weirdly implemented, it is great. I mean, I really do think, because like starting with up through 9, like summons were basically just really powerful spells. Use a lot of MP, stuff like that.
With really pretty cinematics. Really pretty animations. Yeah,
but then starting with 10, they are like this like totally separate system from the regular battle system, where your other party members go away and you fight with this thing for a while, and those later games never impressed upon me like, okay, what's the advantage here? Like, why do I want to use this thing that's more time consuming and slow to use compared to just fighting with my regular guys? Like, it never felt like a major they're just what I don't know, in 10, 12 stuff like that, like it's never been that compelling to me. And I feel like when back when summons were really powerful spells was the most useful they ever were. And I think 8 does the best job of making them very powerful spells, but also distinguishing them from spells just enough, but not too much. It strikes the right balance, I think.
100%. And Bill, and speaking of summons, Bill, you wanted to talk about Diablos.
Diablos is a fun little summon. So Diablos is literally a magic lamp that you get right at the start of the game
from the headmaster of the school you attend.
The Robin Williams Sid. Yes.
Robin Williams Sid. Yeah.
Yep.
So do you guys fight Diablos the first chance you get?
100. I mean, it doesn't really matter at that point because he scales
I
with
kind
you.
of forget like the specific. I remember it was weird, but I don't remember all the specifics of how this works.
I did.
Well, my first playthrough,
I fought him right away.
My first playthrough, I opened up the lantern and I was like, "What the hell is happening?"
Just suddenly this demon shows up. You're like, all right, I guess.
Well, first you end up in hell, and then all of a sudden a demon shows up, and you're like, wait a minute, where am I?
The summons are, I think you're right, Try, though. The summons in this game are the best implemented. Now, I have not played all the other Final Fantasies like you have, which is why I had you on the Final Fantasy Draft, because I don't have nearly as much context for a lot of the rest of the series. But out of the ones I've played, it 100% uses summons the best. It makes it. They take hits for you. They determine depending which summons you have equipped to your characters or junctioned, since it is Final Fantasy VIII, but equipped to your characters determines which stats you're able to junction magic to. You can individually tell, like your summons can learn a shitload of different abilities. Some of the abilities are just more damage for when the summon attacks. Others are for more health for your summon, because like I said before, they are basically a shield in your stead where they have their own health bar and they will take the hits for you while you're waiting to summon them. Some of the ones are abilities like we mentioned with Diablos, but there's others that are like 20% strength, 40% magic. It'll up your strength and magic things by huge percentages. So if you want to, there are some summons that'll allow you to have, like, I guess real quick, the different battle commands that you have and like attributes you have in battle, you always have attack. Then you can either select draw, magic, guardian force, which is your summon, or item. But you can only pick
items.
4.
Poor items.
See, for me, it was always magic. I never used magic. It was always draw, guardian force, and items. And then, of course, your attack. Because you always had attack no matter what. But so those were the 4 I would always go with. And obviously, there's always one odd man out. So you have to pick and choose. It's a little bit like Pokemon in that aspect where you only have 4 abilities and you can only choose. So you have to make room for some. But unlike Pokemon,
I guess I use magic because money is fairly limited in the game.
Yes, items are very limited. Way that,
money is limited, so therefore buying items is limited. Yeah, because you get a salary in this game. Monsters don't drop money.
That's another aspect of the battle system, the ranking system.
Oh, I mean, we'll get into that a little bit when we get to the story. I think that the story and world setting, but yes, you have a paycheck that just disperses to you randomly, and depending on your rank in your teenage military academy, you get a certain stipend pretty much. But what I wanted to finish up real quick with the different battle commands. So those are your 4 main ones. You pick 4 total, and then you have additional like abilities that you can choose from that don't. Some of them show up as extra commands in. Actually, no, none of them show up as commands. Like the abilities you choose are all like I said, encounter none, where you just get rid of random encounters. You can also do the bonuses for strength or magic. There's also an HP bonus. So what's kind of cool is that you can then decide, well, I really want Squall, the main character here, to just be a fucking tank and just be able to take all the hits in the world. And so you just put all the HP on him. Or you want him to do nothing but damage, so you put a 20% strength boost and a 40% strength boost on him. So you're getting like 60%, that's insane. Or you can do it with magic if you want to go the magic route. Magic is definitely useful, though, because we were talking about drawing before. The higher your magic stat is, the more spells you'll draw from an enemy and from draw points. So early in game, you're only getting maybe like 3 to 7 if you're lucky. Usually on average, I would say 5. But by late game, you're getting, like, I was getting consistently 9. Now, granted, I was also only level 30 when I beat the game because, like I said, during this playthrough, my first playthrough, I was level 100. Like, I did every side quest. I fought the Omega Weapon. I beat the Omega Weapon. Only hidden boss in a Final Fantasy I've ever beaten. I loved this game so much back when I first played it. This time around, I was just trying to steamboat right or whatever I don't even know what the fuck that phrase was. I just made that up, but it's just plow right through it. Steamboat. That's not even a thing.
Steamboat right through it. That sounds.
Let's go back to the 1800s.
I mean, the garden does kind of become a boat at one point. So,
but I was just trying to plow straight through it. So, but the magic spell, the magic boost is super helpful because you can draw more spells. But I love that abilities, that the different abilities you get from summons, and those additional abilities I'm talking about. Depending on which summons you have equipped to a character, they may only get 1 or 2 or even up to 3. So, like, depending on which summons you have, there's a bunch of hidden summons, which. This actually makes it, because of the way the summons work, it actually makes sense to go out of your way for these extra summons, because they do a ton of, like, there's specifically one I really wish I would have gotten, and it's a little bit tougher to get because you have to get Marlboro tentacles. You have to get like 6 of them to get it. The Doom Train. Because Doom Train does a shitload of status ailments on all the enemies just through its basic attack. So, like, there are some bosses that are really nasty to fight, but if you cast Doom Train right off the bat, they are incapacitated for the rest of the fight. It's wonderful.
Something such a metal name too.
So, something that we haven't really mentioned, though, is, we're talking about, like, here's all these weird, wild intricacies of the battle system, but at its core, it plays out very similarly, to any Final Fantasy going back to 4 up to that point. It's an ATB, active time battle based system. You've got your ATB meters that fill. Your characters get their turn when it appears. It's on the surface very similar, but yeah, the underlying systems are different. Then there are other little things like Squall has a gunblade timed trigger thing, which I do.
Context sensitive.
Yeah, it's very similar to like what Super Mario RPG would have been. One of the relatively few examples I know of at the time, anyway, where you time it with the swing of the sword. And
when did Legend of Dragoon come out?
It's R1 or R2, I forget.
R1, yep.
Yeah, and you do a little extra damage. So that's a fun active aspect to it. But yeah, I mean, all these underlying things are what makes it so cool. But the game's tutorials, even though it's like they show clearly what to do, they're also very sleep-inducing. So it can be a little hard to pay attention. And the menu interface is maybe a bit not ideal, because if I recall correctly, when you go into the junctioning page, which they put it right at the top of the menu, just like they put jobs at the top of the menu in Final Fantasy V because it's so important. But then once you go in, don't you have to like hit like cancel then to then even tab up to where you can go over to the magic page?
Yeah,
and isn't it like truncated? Menu. Like, I don't even know if it says magic. It might say like Ma or something like that.
Yeah,
like it's almost this like presented as this like minor side aspect that maybe you could mess with it or you could not. And it's like, no, that is the core of the game, and they make it like a few steps too many to get to. There's definitely a few menu problems, in addition to the fact that there is no option for a blue menu, which broke my heart.
Yeah, 8's menus are very, very dull.
That is the first thing I do every time I start Final Fantasy IX. Like, before I even move Zidane, I hit the triangle button, I go into the menu and I make it blue. Even though the Final Fantasy IX blue is not my favorite blue menu in the series, but dang it, Final Fantasy menus are blue, okay? Not gray.
No, it's funny. That was changing it. The change they did in Final 8 was a conscious decision to make it more like Final Fantasy Tactics. That was I read an interview. There's a bunch of stuff. So real quick, some things I read an interview that had from a lot of the key people, like the chief graphic designer Yusuke Naora. There's obviously Tetsuya Nomura was interviewed for it, but also Hiroyuki Ito, who was the battle director for this game. Reading the interview for it was pretty interesting. The first thing that really stuck out to me is one of the worst quotes I've ever read, and not worst because it says something bad. It's just the most nothing quote I've ever read. So he goes, and I quote, "My ideas eventually took shape, and it became the junction system." And I'm like, okay. He does elaborate. But that really screamed to me. If any of you know the Brian Regan stand-up of like, he hates it when authors use the phrase "one thing led to another," and he's like, "Isn't that your job as a writer to say what one thing led to another?" And he goes, "As a young man, Adolf Hitler was rejected in his application to art school. One thing led to another. And the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the sovereign nation of Japan." And he's like, "Oh my God, this is some pamphlet." And that critique of like one thing led to another reminded me, I thought of that immediately when I read "my ideas eventually took shape and became the junction system." Like, that means nothing to me. What were your ideas? He did elaborate. To his credit, he did elaborate a little bit further. He talked about how he wanted the characters to be able to have their weapons be constantly shown on screen. He doesn't really elaborate when he meant that by, like, because in Final 8, when you get an upgraded weapon, you see it in the battles, don't you? Don't you see the, or is it the same every time?
You do.
It does
see
change.
the weapons.
Yeah.
Really, the weapons generally change in Final Fantasy games up to that point.
It's most
so
apparent
it wasn't
with
exactly
Squall, because Squall's gunblades get fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, they're great.
Goes on.
But that's why I was confused about it, because I'm like, you do see the changes. So I don't know if he meant, like, he said it would have been too difficult to do, like it would have been too much work to do. And I'm like, did you mean on the world map? Did you mean like in every instance of the game and not just in the battles? So
I feel like there might be a more limited number of weapons in this game, because
there is. There's only like
you only have.
Yeah, each character only has so many upgrades, and that is, I guess, an aspect of the battle system that we haven't talked about. That's another weak point to me. I mean, most of everything about the battle system in this game and magic system and all that, very positive for me. Leveling's weird. Also, weapon upgrades, don't love it. I'm
not gonna lie. I think the weapon upgrade system is more confusing than the junction system.
You get it through magazines that you randomly find laying around.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even so much that it's confusing. It's just that if you are not following a guide, which, I enjoy games better when I don't, but I will resort to it if I have to. But if you are following a guide, the chances of you getting basically any upgrades is almost nothing, because you need drops from enemies that you might never fight, or you certainly wouldn't fight enough times to get enough of the item.
Yeah.
And then when you see in the magazine what items you have, you're like, well, I have 2 of these, but I need 5, and I have no clue where I got it from.
And you have no idea where you get them from either. It's not like there's a bestiary in the game to tell you, like, oh, you can get screws from, geezards. That's actually true. You get screws from geezards. That means nothing to anybody else who hasn't played the game. That's a sentence of nonsense.
That and to this day, like, I don't know if Final Fantasy VIII like set the seeds of distaste for this in my mouth, but I still don't love like resource gathering. I mean, some games do make it work, but like I don't get tickled by the idea of like, ooh, I'm collecting all the iron ore, and ooh, I'm collecting all the this and that. Like I'm just like, you know what? Like, I just want my items. I want I want a clear and limited number of items. I don't want to make items. I don't want to do all this stuff. Sometimes it absolutely works. But usually, like if I'm looking at an upcoming game and I'm like, ugh, look at all these things they're collecting, and then they have to craft this and that, and they have to upgrade this and that. And I feel like my knee-jerk aversion to that began with Final Fantasy VIII, because it's so frustrating that you basically aren't going to get any weapon upgrades unless you follow a guide, or you might be really. Yeah. I would say you'll probably luck out and get like most characters like level 2 or 3 weapon, but like otherwise, like just forget about it.
And that's a double hit. That's a double negative depending on which character you're talking about. So Squall, if you don't get his weapon upgrades, you don't get his limit break upgrades. His best limit is only obtained by getting his ultimate weapon. Zell, you can only get his limit break upgrades by finding another set of magazines called Fighting King, or I forget what it's called.
It's
something like that. Renoa, you get her limit break upgrades through the Pet Pals magazines. Like everything is through magazines that you randomly find.
I mean, Quistis is blue magic though, doesn't she learn them from enemies? I think.
Yeah, she's the blue mage of the game. Irvine, his is all just different types of ammo, so you just have to get like weird random. I hated playing as Irvine. I never found him that enjoyable personally.
Irvine like is not a character I tend to use through the middle of the game much, but he's always been in my final party, because I forget what it is, but I think one of the cards, if you break it down, like gives him like a ton of like insanely powerful ammo, and he can just like chew through Ultimecia pretty much.
Oh, that's good to know, because I didn't do any. Ultimecia was definitely an interesting boss fight. I think real quick, just talking about the limit break. So I actually really like Squalls a lot, and Zell's. Like I actually, my final party was Zell, Selphie, and Squall. Because Squall's, obviously you have to have Squall, he's the main character, but Renzo Kukin is just such a fun thing because it's this timed attack thing over and over and over again. Zell, because he's kind of like Tifa in a little bit, with the brawling, where you have like a couple seconds, and you have like 5 seconds, and you can input as many different basically bonus, like a limit break attacks that you can. So like one limit break, it just has you hit up and down on the D-pad. Another one is like left circle or something like that, or left circle or something like that. So if you're fast and it gives you options on the screen, you can choose between 1 and 3 different limit breaks, and if you pay attention to it, there's like a tree. There's like a limit break tree where like if you start off with one, that opens up 2 different options, and then you select those 2 options. Then you have to pick one of those 2 options. If you pick the right one, and if you pick the right branches down the tree, you'll end up with like an insane limit break that just breaks everything. It's really fun.
Yeah, they did do a really good job of making. Like with an RPG, sometimes that stuff can feel out of place because it's like, oh, it's too, Twitch input based for an RPG. But I do think they struck the right balance. But the one thing I will say, limit breaks being based on you're more likely to get a limit break on your turn if your health is low is not as fun as 100%. The limit break meter in Final Fantasy VII. This is actually something that comes back from Final Fantasy VI. Although
desperation attacks.
Yes, it's a lot more likely to happen in Final Fantasy VIII, because I've played Final Fantasy VI probably like 5 times, I would guess, and I think I've seen 1, maybe 2 ever.
Yeah.
well, and I mentioned before that Aura spell. The Aura spell, you don't have to be at low health. If you cast it on yourself, you're basically guaranteed to get your limit breaks. It says increased chance of limit breaks. No, it's like 80 to 90%. Like you're basically going to get it in any second, and you can
just hit the triangle button to recycle the through the turn order and get it again
until you get
it if you didn't get it. Yeah.
And now the reason I chose Selphie, though, Selphie has full cure, which is super handy in fights. So you can keep hitting, because Selphie, her thing is like a slot. It's a random chance thing. So you have a random spell and you can hit do-over or cast. And so I would just keep hitting do-over until I got full cure. Know how I beat the final boss? Selphie has the most overpowered limit break in the entire game because you can kill any boss with it. Literally any boss. It's a low chance of getting it, but if you get the spell called The End, it will literally kill any enemy that you have. It literally puts them out to a field of flowers and then it just fades out. I beat Ultimisia with The End.
I love when they take away the final boss's like boss immunity. It's the greatest thing ever.
Right.
I mean that really is key. I mean, like I said, like the fact that you could do status effects relatively reliably on bosses in this game was a huge game changer to me, and it's something that has really carried on in the series where, you know, status effects are, especially in the online Final Fantasies, like status effects are like a key part of battle, and that adds a interesting dimension that I think games before 8 lacked. Generally,
I would agree. I think just in general, it as much as we've discussed some of the issues with the battle system between how it gives you limit breaks and weapon upgrades and just in general how like it's reliant on random magazine drops, I do think the weapon or the item collecting in this is the worst out of anything, because if you're playing like a game like Stardew Valley or something else where like the point is collecting things, the game they use the act of collecting as a game mechanic, versus this is not a game mechanic. It's a side effect of a battle that you're relying on to collect things. Like there's a layer of like it obscures it. I can't speak right now. But like it obscures it a little bit. It puts a barrier between you and what you want to do. Versus if I were to play, you know, like, I mean, hell, even like, let's talk about like a collectathon platform like Donkey Kong 64. There's no barrier between me collecting the golden bananas or the regular bananas or whatever. I just have to run up and do it, maybe shoot a couple enemies, but not go into a random battle and hope that I get it. I know, like, you know what you have to do to collect what you're trying to collect. In Final Fantasy VIII, you may know what you need to do, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it because it's all random chance. And Mug is one of the most important abilities you get from some of the Guardian Forces, because there's a much higher chance of you getting the items that you need in order to get to craft whatever you're trying to craft, whether it's an item, whether it's to learn how to summon Doom Train. There's just so many different things about it.
Totally.
I think what's just frustrating is like, and I think this is a good spot to, is there anything else you guys want to comment on with the battle system before we move on to the story? Because I do have a transition in mind for that, but I want to hear any final thoughts on, because I feel like we've covered a wide area of things with this, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about.
I think we've got it on that front.
Honestly, all I'd really say about it is this battle system is like, to me, like the best way to sum up the battle system of Final Fantasy VIII is it's ambitious but flawed.
Yes, absolutely. And mostly hits the mark, but I can understand why for some people it wouldn't, depending on like, you know, how paranoid they are about missing things and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I 100% agreed. I think that's why I've developed a love of this game still, even though we're going to get to the big negative thing I have with I was saying at the beginning, like I have opinions. I have strong opinions on this. It's because I absolutely love this combat system. Flaws and all, I know it has issues, but the fact that once you understand how it works, it is one of the most satisfying things ever. And to talk about the weapons, the Hiroyuki Ito, he talked about how the reason why they wanted to focus less on weapons, he created the junction system specifically in a response to, he wanted the player to have the same sensation that you get when you get a new weapon, say in like Final Fantasy VII, but through the junction system. Like, how do you do that without having to rely on weapons? And I think what I got from reading this interview, this is on Shmuppalations, by the way, for those who are curious. It's a fantastic website if you're looking for really interesting like game dev interviews that we didn't get over here in the US or North America. They really tried to do they really challenged themselves with this game, and I didn't realize it until reading this interview. Like, a lot of the stuff that they did with Final 7, they really tried to do the opposite of, or try in a different way in Final 8. So, like, Final 7, that satisfaction of finding a new weapon, or you can buy a new weapon and you can see, oh, look at this new damage number that I just got. You get that same, I think he was pretty spot on. Like, you get that sensation, like, all right, I see this new spell. I see the spell. Does it junction better to my strength or to my magic? Oh my gosh, I'm doing an extra 400 damage per swing. Holy shit, that's amazing. Like, I remember when I first junctioned, what was it? Arrow to the arrow spell to my, that's AERO, not like a bow and arrow, but arrow as in air. AERO. I junctioned to my strength stat, and all of a sudden Squall was doing like an extra 600 damage per hit. I went, holy shit, that was a huge jump. So I think for that, it actually works. So he created the junction system to give players that same sensation. I think that's an interesting challenge. Like, how do you give players a sensation of getting a new weapon without actually giving them a new weapon, which I thought was a really cool idea. It missed.
In some ways, it's more surprising when you put it that way, because it's like, oh, I got a new weapon. Of course it's going to be more powerful. But this, like you said, like there can be a genuine surprise depending on what spell you junction and you know, what ability you just unlock through the Guardian Force to junction to a different stat. It's like, wow, this like totally changes everything.
Exactly. And even some Guardian Forces up your stats just inherently when you junction them, when you equip them to your character. The last thing I wanted to say that he talked about with this system was that the draw system, and I didn't think about it this way until I read it, and I think it's a really interesting point. The draw system makes late game the late part of the game more interesting than in previous Final Fantasies. Like he was talking about how in Final Fantasy VII, late game's basically trivial. You're maxed out, you're doing shitloads of damage, you have your HP and MP up materials equipped, and you're just like, you're a tank that can't be stopped. Like, especially if you get a ton of the summons, and like if you get like Omni Slash and stuff like that, like that game is like a breeze towards the end, you know? So what he did is that, as we saw here, they don't make the game necessarily harder at the end game, but the draw system still adds intrigue. You come across a new enemy. Oh, what spells do they have? It encourages you to slow down, not just attack. Let's just get through the game, or let's level up. Let's keep grinding. It encourages you to slow down and be like, oh, I've never seen this spell before. Oh, I wonder what spell this enemy might have. Or, as we've seen in some of the bosses have summons that you can draw from them. I believe Siren is one of those summons that you can get from Everett or something like that at the one boss. And it's stuff like that. Like the draw system, I didn't think about it when I'm playing it, but he's right. It really encourages you to, it takes the end game and it's no longer trivial. The end game is now interesting in regular battles because it's new enemies you've never seen before, and you don't know what magic spells you could get, which means that every new magic spell you draw is a new possibility of a new weapon for comparing it to what we saw before.
I never thought of that before. I mean, that's a really interesting perspective. It makes battles in and of themselves like exploratory and have a satisfying sense of discovery.
Yeah. Final 8's battle system's just fantastic. I really, like we were all saying, flaws and all, it's a really interesting, deep system that if you understand how it works, you can break the game in some of the most fun ways. It is so, like, I was level 30 doing like 4k damage, which I remember on my first playthrough, I was level 100 and only doing 4k damage. So like you can be level 30 doing the same amount as level 100. And if you're smart about it, it would be even more. It's just wild. But I want to move on. I want to move on real quick before we hit the spoiler wall for the story. Let's just talk a little bit about the setup of the game. I feel like maybe we should have talked about like what the overall like setting is, so people haven't. We jumped straight into the battle system because I think I was just so excited to talk about
it is the most well-known aspect of the game.
100%. I want to know your opinions on this. The setting, the world of Final Fantasy VIII. I personally found it like fascinating. Like I love Final Fantasy VII, but I think Final Fantasy VIII feels the world of Final 8 feels more lived in. It feels like the people and the NPCs that you encounter feel more real to me than they do in Final Fantasy VII. But that's just my perspective.
It's the least fantasy of all the Final Fantasies.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
It's the what?
The least fantasy, I'd say, of all the Final
Fantasies. Yeah, I mean, maybe 15 would be more so, but it's like
true.
It takes a step. Like Final Fantasy VII is almost like more technologically advanced and also more medieval at the same time than the real world. And then Final Fantasy
steampunk meets like cyberpunk at the same time. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy VIII then like kind of equalizes it where it's very little fancy aside from like the witch aspect and magic obviously, but yeah, it's very real world. It feels like it's supposed to take place in roughly the 1999 of that world. They've got similar vehicles and
you get a car,
schools and things like that. Like it all feels similar in that aspect. And really, I mean, this is maybe I'm saying this a little too early, but like even monsters aren't native to the world.
Yes, they aren't. We'll definitely get into that. And it's funny you mentioned the Bill. You brought up the fact that this is very non-fantasy. It's very sci-fi. And Try, you said other than the sorceress or the witch. Or sorceress is what she's called. That is reading the interview. They both. I forget who said it. I think it might have been the chief graphic designer. But they talked about how Final Fantasy VII was much more Blade Runner inspired, and you can totally see that in Midgar. Midgar is very Blade Runner inspired. But with Final Fantasy VIII, they wanted to make it brighter. They wanted to make it visually brighter. That's why you see a lot more the game. And I agree. If you compare Final 7 to 8, 8 is a lot brighter of a game. Like visually, it's a lot more colorful. There's a lot less gloomy atmosphere to it. And you can see it even like if you look at Balam Garden where you start, and it's, this beautiful like blue building with a golden halo just hovering around it, which the graphic designers even were like, that makes no possible sense, but it looks really good, and it's Final Fantasy, so we're keeping it in.
Exactly.
Exactly. And
I love that aspect of Final Fantasy.
One of the quotes that I wrote down, hold on, where are we at here? It was, they wanted to make, they wanted to portray, this isn't a quote, but they wanted to portray unrealistic things realistically. And they were referencing specifically the gardens, Balam Garden. And listeners, just for a real quick synopsis of what the world is like in Final Fantasy VIII, there are these places called gardens, which are basically schools. And they're schools for mercenaries, and these mercenaries get hired out by countries or by individuals or whatnot, and your characters are all mercenaries at a school called Balam Garden. There's a little bit more to it than that, but your starter characters are all from Balam Garden. And the basic premise is that there is a evil witch named Ultimecia who's trying to...
Adia.
Oh, it's Adia, but you find out she's... story.
Ultimecia, you don't hear about for a long time.
For a long while.
Yeah.
But there's an evil witch who's trying to effectively just take over the world and destroy it, and you're trying to stop her. And it's what I like about the world of Final Fantasy VIII is that you have these, like gardens where these like teenagers becoming mercenaries. I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of like subtext you could read into that about problematic stuff of like teenage mercenaries, but we'll take that out of this conversation. But like,
it's a very common Japanese trope, really.
Yes.
Like the whole military school. Like at the time, I had never seen anything like it before, so this was like completely fresh and original, even though it probably kind of wasn't even back then.
Guess who came up with the idea? Nomura. Nomura was the inspiration for the gardens. This interview is so interesting to read because all of them referenced Nomura giving his 2 cents, and in a very polite way, it very much feels like Nomura was like the annoying kid who's just like, hey, what about this? Hey, what? Like constantly offering unsolicited opinions. I don't know if that's actually what happened. Mind you, I'm not trying to say Nomura did this or he was a nuisance to the dev team, but they all reference him for some in one way or another. And Nomura himself said in the interview how he would give unsolicited opinions, like whether people were looking for an opinion on something or not. So,
well, I mean, I guess he was ambitious, and I mean, hey, for his career at least, I guess it got him somewhere.
I mean, he started with FF7. He did.
Well, he was Mystic Quest.
He was a character designer in previous games.
Okay.
Yeah. Or at least like sprite designer. Like
He designed monsters in 6. I know.
Yes,
that one
yes.
for
I believe Mystic Quest and 5 were his first credits, maybe. But yeah. Anyway.
I guess I'll just have to look for a bunch of monsters with a ton of belts on them in Final 6.
Believe it or not, his monster designs are actually some of his best work.
Oh, I believe he actually did design some of the Guardian Forces / summons in this game, and since this was very futuristic, he didn't want any of the Guardian Forces to look humanoid, which is why Rama, the Thunder summon that you usually see, is not in the game. It's replaced with Quetzalcoatl, however you pronounce.
Quetzalcoatl,
I always just said Quezzy because I like that summon a lot. Apparently, he also redesigned. I don't know if this is what he said in the interview, and it seems a little pervy. He goes, for this same reason, he didn't want any humanoids. He redesigned Siren from Final Fantasy IV to not have any clothing. I'm like, all right, thanks for sharing.
Right,
thanks for sharing
that's
that.
his reason.
It was just kind of and this was a funny quote because Guardian Forces you level up. Another reason they didn't put Rama in, and apparently Ito, the battle designer, is saying you can't raise an old man any further. Like you can't level up that old man Rama any further. He's already too old. If you level him up, he's just gonna die. Like that's kind of like the vibe I got from the quote. It was kind of amusing.
That's a little pessimistic, but okay.
But morbid way of looking at it, but okay.
Well, Ito, he says, plus Ito, battle designer, was saying you can't raise an old man any further. Laughs, and I'm like.
I mean, I guess this was the first time that summons actually got leveled up, so I can see why they were making considerations like that.
It's also the first time the summons had personalities, in a way. Sort
of, yeah, because when you fight, some of the ones that you have to fight to obtain, like Ifrit, you talk to him a little bit, they're all very indignant. They're like, oh, you puny human.
Yeah. I mean,
Ifrit's hilarious.
I mean, Final Fantasy VI does have, like, a lot of, with the whole Esper world and stuff.
True.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
The chief graphic designer, Yusuke Naora, I'm so bad at that. That it's because it's Naora, and for an English speaker to pronounce it correctly is really difficult for me. Naora, whatever. They mentioned Final Fantasy VII had over 500 map streams, and Final Fantasy VIII had over 800. And they talked about how when they made the characters look more realistic in this compared to Final VII, it doubled the amount of artwork they would have to do for backgrounds because the actual 3D models were bigger than what they had in Final 7. So to make everything adjust for the proper proportions, they had to make all the images, all the stuff they did larger. So it doubled the amount of work they did. They also talked about.
There's also a lot more like lower camera angles. Like
they talk about that too.
On the character's level, less like. I mean, they do exist where they're like wide and overhead, but like if you think of like Sector 7 in Final Fantasy VII, like the entire, other than inside the houses, it's like the entire town is like one zoomed out shot that pans a little bit. Whereas Final Fantasy VIII. You're much more close down to the characters. Of course, it does come with the caveat that that screens do change more often. It's a little slower than Final Fantasy VII.
That was actually purposeful because of the extra details of the characters. They actually had to change. They had to basically make everything more cinematic. I'm trying to find the exact quote. Here we go. We spent more effort on the camera work for this game than ever before to create scenes that combined wide angle, zoomed out shots with close-ups of the characters. But that approach meant we had to double the amount of graphics content for Final Fantasy VIII than Final Fantasy VII had, which of course meant double the amount of work. In actuality, there were many reasons for the increased workload for Final Fantasy VIII, but I guess befitting our first 4 CD release. So yeah, there's just a ton of work put into the world in this game. Like I said, just to kind of get back to the setting, there's 2 warring countries sort of they used to be at war, but there's almost like a Cold War going on now when the game starts. And that's Galbadia and Esthar, or however you say Esthar.
I mean, Esthar is like
Esthar.
Such an anomaly for most of the game. Like it's this very non-concrete concept.
Yes.
Because it's such an isolationist country, and you have just, I mean, the fact, it is rather confusing the first time you play the game. You're like, the sorceress, like, where does she come from? Why is she integrating herself into like Galbadia and stuff like that? Like what are her goals? Where does she come from? It's just like, it's so confusing until you get to Esthar, which is like really late in the game.
And it's super futuristic.
It comes out of nowhere. Oh yeah.
Like,
oh yeah. I mean, maybe that's intentional. I mean, most of, perhaps, I don't know if like the common citizen in Final Fantasy VIII like has any concept of how advanced Esthar is. Like, they just know it's a place that exists, but they don't know. I don't know, because it is very confusing until you get there and you're just like, whoa.
Well, it's treated almost as a mythological place. Like people hear about it. There's people who come from there, but no one has really seen it at the same time, except for the people that came from there. And they may always make it sound like they don't really talk all that much. And when you finally get to Esthar, you understand why no one's been able to find it, which we'll kind of get to in
invisible.
Well, yeah. I guess that's not that much of a spoiler. It's invisible, and you find out it's a wild thing. And the whole reason Edea the sorceress is trying to, like I said, she's trying to like destroy the world. It's a very kind of boring, villainous plot, in my opinion. But you don't know that at first, and it's I guess that's a mild spoiler, but there's much more deep spoilers as we go along. And what the political intrigue of it is, like, there's this Cold War between this mysterious country Esthar and Galbadia, which Galbadia looks like it's our world. It very much feels like a 1990s city.
Yeah, it's like Europe, basically.
Yes,
it's like modern Europe.
And there's other gardens, like we said, those schools around the world. There's at least 3 total. Balam, I think there's only 3. Balam, Trabia up north, and Galbadia Garden in the country of Galbadia. And that's where some of the political intrigue comes in, because the gardens are supposed to be independent of the countries that they live in or are around. So there's a large talking point in the game, like, is Galbadia Garden going to be taken over by the Galbadian government? And it kind of heightens this political drama. So the world is really interesting. Like, Galbadia is trying to actively, at the beginning of the game, Galbadia is trying to actively expand its empire. Like, it's trying to attack this town named Dalit in the very beginning of the game. And I guess we can talk about this because this is done in the demo of the game. Like, when the game begins with you taking a test, like, you're trying to take the seed test to become a seed, which is the mercenary for the garden. And your test is
it's a real world military operation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's like an organ transplant. Like, you don't know it's happening until a real event happens that necessitates it, and then it's like, all right, we're moving, you know?
Yep.
And it's like, and it leaves me a question. How do they do these tests? Or are they just waiting for these giant conflicts so they can be mercenaries? Like, it's so strange. But you take the test by helping the city of Dalit fight back the Galbadian invaders, and that's how the game begins. So I think that's a decent enough setting that you have to know there's two countries that are kind of at war with each other, but Cold War right now.
And you don't start in either of them.
Yeah,
like,
you
I
start
don't even
in this
know
like neutral island.
Yeah, like I guess it's just like Balam. Is it the country of Balam? Like,
yeah,
I think
there's the town of Balam. Like,
is that a country? I don't know.
I don't know.
It exists. That's kind of as far as you get.
You're not wrong. But I think what I'm trying to say is I like the world that Final Fantasy VIII builds because there is so much like they reference it feels lived in because of this like war between these two countries, and now they're in like a kind of a Cold War era. The one country is now trying to regain some power and kind of annex like other countries and cities around it. It's just this really interesting world that it kind of throws you into, and the fact that you have like these teenage mercenary schools, so it's like this weird slice of life school that you would see in Persona but combined with mercenaries and Final Fantasy. It's very interesting and strange. And the sorceress, actually the reason the sorceress is even visually designed the way she is Nomura specifically was like, well, I'm tired of Final Fantasy not having any fantasy in it. It's all sci-fi. So he made pushed for the sorceress to be put into the game because he wanted it to still maintain some fantasy elements, which I think is kind of interesting. But I think, is there anything you guys want to talk about the world before we kind of put up a spoiler wall and talk about the story of this game?
I mean, what's kind of interesting is they drop a lot of hints of things early on that aren't resolved pretty late. Like, for example, radio communications do not work in this world, and they randomly stopped, well, not randomly, but for unknown reasons stopped working.
You're
like
right.
what, like 15, 18 years ago or something like that. And so a big part of everything that happens in the very beginning of the game is trying to make like a major broadcast to the world, which is, even though this is a very modern world, it's also very isolated because of the difficulty in making wide-scale broadcasts. So that's actually an interesting wrinkle to the world.
A thing that also I find really interesting about this game, like this game has a very like overall like aspect of like realism that it's trying to push, and something that this game does that I find really cool is, rather than doing the traditional Final Fantasy, all the party members just kind of merge into the one for the overworld sections. They follow you through.
Oh
the
yeah,
overworld,
yeah, I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, there were RPGs that did that kind of thing before, like the Lunar games. And I'm trying to think of some others. Breath of Fire.
Bill was saying Earthbound.
Oh yeah. I think Breath of Fire might.
I think Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. But to me that was new, and certainly seeing it in 3D was very ambitious.
But even though they all have the same exact run animation,
and they all like if you like run past where you need to go, and then you like turn around and go back, they follow your path exactly. It's so I mean, it is very robotic. I mean, in Final Fantasy IX though, they're consolidated within you again.
Yeah.
I
think 8's the only one that did it.
But then they did it much better in Chrono Trigger, where there does seem to be sort of a loose circle around you, it feels like, where they sort of rubber band back toward you, but they won't follow that like exact path that you make, which is very illogical. Like it's a lot more natural in Chrono Cross. I think I might have said Chrono Trigger. I meant to say Chrono Cross. But yeah, that was kind of the peak of where they went with like the party follow system. But on PlayStation,
one of my favorite things is if you hit the analog stick just slightly enough, they'll all just like kind of like move like in place, like so they're just kind of skating along.
They're almost like moonwalking forward.
Yeah,
I played with a standard controller. Well, Actually, I don't think I did, but I was like kind of anti DualShock for a while. And I like, no, these games should be played with a D-pad. And so what was actually kind of nice though for people who did play with a D-pad was that the default was run instead of walk, which was new. You could reverse it where you like hold the cancel button to run, but holding the cancel button by default actually makes you walk slowly. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But anyway.
Well, I also think something I forgot to bring up. There's and it ties into the story, which I won't spoil up at this point. But there's resistance groups to Galbadia as well. Like we mentioned, just to add, we were talking about how this kind of the world feels very fleshed out, and I think a lot of it has to do with like I said, this war. There's resistance groups to the different nations. The each country feels very different in how they approach their problems, which is interesting. Also, the fact that Triple Triad. We haven't even talked about Triple Triad.
Oh god.
The card game in this game, the card game mini game in this game,
the sole mini game in this game,
the sole mini game. But it's a good mini game, and it's fun because there's different. There's different rules depending on which regions you go to, which I always hated. I always wanted to stay with the generic, like you pick your cards.
That always confused me.
Oh, dude, there's so many. There's like somewhere there's like a plus minus thing where for some reason, like if you put the right cards with the specific numbers in a specific order, they all turn a whole row or a corner. And I'm like, I don't understand how this works, and it's never explained to you. How the plus
I wish works. I was better at Triple Triad than I am. It is cool though. It's fun.
But it just adds to that element of like this world feels lived in because you go to different areas and the rules change depending on which area you're in, and you can literally spread rules. Like if you like a specific rule set, you can make it so you could if you play correctly, if you don't change the rule set, you can actually spread it to the entire world and homogenize a rule set if you want to, which I never took the time to do that. That takes a lot of effort and that you have to really enjoy Triple Triad to do it, but it's kind of cool that you can. I really think it's interesting that they offered you to do offered that little bit of a mechanic in the first place just to make it feel much more lived in. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say. Bill, do you have any final thoughts on the world or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, a lot of honestly, the biggest aspect that we haven't covered is the story. So
then let's do it. Spoiler wall right here. Maybe I'll put a music break in. Maybe I won't. I usually don't. Let's be real. But spoiler wall right here. If you have not played Final Fantasy VIII and you're curious about the story, pause it here. Come back to it after you beat the game. 40 hours later. That's fine. I can wait. We'll wait. But spoiler wall right here. All right. So I have one comment to make before we go in, and Bill, I want to hear. We don't have to necessarily go through the story beat by beat, but we can just talk about some of our favorite elements, some of the different aspects of it, some of the things we like and dislike. And I'm just going to have one little comment. I want to know if either of you agree or disagree with me on this. I think the story is one of the worst aspects of this game. I fucking hate this story so much. It drives me up a wall. But I started with try last time. Bill, rebuttal or agreement? What are your thoughts?
So, okay. So this game's story I like, but you need like an encyclopedia and like a lot of background like explanations to understand what's going on in this story. In a first playthrough, because my god, it is a confusing mess, not helped by a poor translation.
Yeah. Try. What about you? Do you agree or disagree with my sentiment? Maybe not as angrily, but do you agree or disagree?
Well, you are certainly not alone in your opinion, and I think I am more alone in my opinion. I like the story. I think it's fine. Even some of the more controversial aspects, I think there's a lot that the game leaves unsaid, and I think that leaves it you can work out a reasonable explanation for it in your head if you want to, in my opinion. But more than just the story itself, I always, I like almost every single Final Fantasy game pretty darn well, with the exception of Final Fantasy 15, and I'm not super huge on 2, the original 2, not 4. I love 4. But I do want to replay 2 sometime with better knowledge of how it works. But besides that, I always like to say that even as much as I like the others, I love 12, I love the MMOs, stuff like that, but I still think that 4 through 9 are the best 6. That entire range are the best 6 Final Fantasies to me.
100%.
And an element that I think all 6 of those share is a really good sense of pacing. It's always building up to these kind of climactic moments. And especially this was very successful in the FMV era of Final Fantasy.
Oh, 100%.
On PlayStation 1, where, FMVs were like, it's probably so hard for younger people to really wrap their head around this, but like they were so mind blowing at the time that they were a reward for playing the game in and of themselves. Yeah,
because you never saw graphics like that ever in a game.
Oh, it was such a treat, and I think really is, even though I would say 7 has the best story of the PlayStation era, I think 8 and 9 really get high marks from me on their pacing. But 7 does too. 7 gets great pacing as well. But there's just this flow that those Super Nintendo and PS1 Final Fantasies have, where it's always building up to this sort of reveal or twist or some sort of climactic moment where you're kind of like, ooh, what's going to happen here? And then you get that, satisfying release, and then you're on to something else. And those ups and downs and, build up to something new, like they happen pretty evenly throughout those games. Whereas as soon as you get to Final Fantasy X, I feel like I like Final Fantasy X. I don't love it as much as a lot of people do, but I feel like a big part of that is the pacing. It's much slower paced. The amount of time between exciting reveals and stuff is much wider, and then the payoff is not as big. And I feel like Final Fantasy VIII, regardless of whether you like its story all that much or not, I do think the pacing of the story is exciting. Like it's exciting, and the action draws you in, and you want to see like what's going to happen next. Although maybe you think what happens next is stupid. I don't know, or maybe the underlying reasons are poorly justified or something. But regardless, I think it's an exciting and well paced game.
I will say 8 has a lot of shock moments in its story where you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm curious what's happening next.
Yeah.
I agree with you on the pacing. Actually 100%. I think my issues with the story comes from the characters. Take out any dislike of Squall. I loved Squall my first playthrough, couldn't stand him this playthrough, but that I don't have as much of an issue with. Like, to me, if you like a character, don't like a character, that's fine. That's more subjective. My issue with it, and this was intentional with the design, going back to the interview I've been talking about, Yoshidori Kitase, the director of the game, Kitase, they wanted to focus, up until this point, Final Fantasy games always focus on a large cast of characters, and you're supposed to see their triumphs and failures and really get this emotional connection to each of the characters, or at least a good chunk of them. Obviously, I always make the joke about Final Fantasy VI with like, who are you really going to go with, like Mog and Umaro, and like, is there a backstory to them that you care about, type of thing. But take that out of there's like 7 or 8 characters that they actually give backstory in Final Fantasy VI. There's a ton they give in Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy IX, there's even a bunch. Final Fantasy VIII, their sole purpose was they said from the start they wanted to tell a story that revolved around two characters instead of focusing on an ensemble cast like all the others. And the rest of the side characters were meant to prop up those two characters. Squall and Renault are the two characters, and honestly, they work decently well. I actually really enjoy the love story between the two. I find Squall really obnoxious, but I do like how as this game progresses and as Renault slowly wins, breaks down the walls around his heart, as cliche as that sounds, I do enjoy that. I find the romance charming. I also find the idea of when you get sent back in time in those story elements, which we'll get to talk about how that happens in the story, but when you see Laguna, Kyros, and Ward, and you kind of get Kyros and Ward honestly aren't that strong characters, but they're a little bit stronger than some of the other main characters in my opinion. But Laguna is fascinating. I love Laguna's character.
Oh, he is. So you had said.
I think he's the best character, arguably, in the entire series.
In the whole of all of Final Fantasy?
I mean, he's up there. He's up there.
Wow. He gets leg cramps.
I think he's just really entertaining to watch because he's just this total screw up.
I love him.
He's always messing up, but he winds up on top.
Yeah,
because he's just so honest and good-hearted.
Yep.
Like something about that is just really.
He's so realistic and relatable.
Yeah. But I will agree that the other character, it is, I guess, an overall less interesting Final Fantasy cast in some ways. Although, I've always found calling it making such a big deal out of the love story aspect of it was always a little weird to me because
it is. It's so different from
Final
every other
Fantasy. Well, I mean, I don't know. At the same time, I feel like it's not. I feel like the love story aspect, the fact that everyone's oh yeah, that's the Renault Squall one. The fact that Renault and Squall are on the game's logo and everything. Yeah. It's all about Renault Squall, love story, and that doesn't really even come together until pretty
Disc
late
3
in the game. Yeah. And every Final Fantasy game has a love story to some extent. In some ways, the whole Cloud Tifa Aeris thing is more interesting. In some ways, Zidane and Dagger is more interesting. I don't know. I never thought Squall and Renault was anything special to focus on, and it's overall it's not a romance story really to me. It's just normal Final Fantasy stuff with crazy stuff happening. It's the love story thing. Just I don't know. I mean, it's a given aspect in almost any Final Fantasy game, and it didn't to me seem like it took any more center stage in this game other than in the promotion of it. That's just my opinion, though.
I think, but the thing is, I understand the point you're making, but their focus was still meant to be the love story, and I don't think it
was meant to be that, but
they don't pull it off that well. Is I think the issue. The other half of it is that because they're trying to focus on two characters, all of the side characters are basically meaningless. Now, with that said,
pretty much.
And that's why the plot twist midway through the game comes out as all right. Hold on, I got a small rant. I do think it was smart that because they're only focusing on two characters, you only have 4 extra side characters. You have Zell, you have Selphie, you have Quistis, you have Irvine, and I think am I missing one? Is there only 4 others?
Oh, I mean, we haven't even talked about Cypher,
but he's
briefly.
Not a playable. You play with him sort of for one mission, but he's kind of more in the same vein that you have Sephiroth in your party in Final 7, or you have.
Yeah.
It's meant for a story progression, not for the actual gameplay.
You get Adia in your party, very briefly. You get Adia in your party the second half of the game.
So all these characters are meant to prop up Squall and Renault. Totally fine, no issue with that. the plot twist in the middle of the game. You know, Irvine is from Galbadia Garden. Selphie is originally from Trebia Garden. They're all from different parts of the world. And you get to the middle of the game, and it really feels like the game designers were like, "Oh shit, we don't have a reason for the player to care about these characters. How do we do that? Oh, let's make them all grow up from the same orphanage. That's how we'll do it all. They all happen to just be orphaned at the same place at the same time." An orphanage run by the headmaster of your garden and the woman possessed by the ultimate evil of the game, who becomes the sorceress.
Yes.
Like, that is one of the dumbest plot twists I've ever experienced in a game. I think there's a way you might have been able to do that and make that plot twist work, but the way they lead up to it, it just does not work, in my opinion. I don't know what they could have done to make it work. It just doesn't work.
Also, their whole justification of why they don't remember is like, using Guardian Forces erases their memories. But the reason why Irvine remembers because he had a diary.
And he didn't start using Guardian Forces until recently. And I'm like, you're a fucking seed that never used a Guardian Force?
Well, actually, I don't think...
no, you're right. Irvine never passed his seed test. I forgot about that.
Here's kind of always been my thing with the whole thing. I've never really heard anyone else make this argument, but in my head, it was not the massive coincidence that it's generally made out to be, because Sid, as you know, we've already put up our spoiler wall. Sid is Sorceress Adia's husband.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she basically gets the idea of gardens from encountering Squall from the future in the past. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And kind of entrusts Sid with the, you know, making that dream a reality. And he collaborates with Norg, and
Norg also comes out of fucking nowhere.
Yes, he does. The Shumi, but yeah, I mean, so my thought, I mean, Sid has been there from the beginning, and I think because he probably knew something about the circumstances surrounding, you know, Squall coming in from the future and stuff, I think Sid, like, basically was kind of the mastermind of getting these people together in the present time. I don't know if that justifies it or not, but that's how it's always been in my head. Like, Sid planned this. It's not necessarily a massive coincidence.
I think it justifies it, but I think the issue I have more is the execution. All the plot twists in this game are not earned. When you have a plot twist that bizarre, like that far out of left field, you need to drop a lot more foreshadowing, so that way when the player or the person, whether it's a movie or a game, when you get to that moment in the story, you can look back at everything before and go, holy crap, so that and that and that and that, and you start piecing all the breadcrumbs they put together for you in order to make that a plot twist work. And
that's fair.
This does not do that. There is, like, Sid is the closest thing that they have to giving you breadcrumbs, because he is very mysterious in the beginning of the game. You know, up until you find out this plot twist, he is kind of mysterious. He kind of talks about like he knows you. He seems overly friendly to every one of you, and you're not quite sure why he likes Squall so much, even though Squall's a little whiny bastard throughout the whole first half of the game, first 2/3 of the game for really. He doesn't, but that's really the only breadcrumb, and that's not enough to earn the plot twist of we all happen to grow up in the same orphanage. And the people who ran, the married couple who ran our orphanage are now the person we're trying to kill, and the person who is our headmaster. Like, and also talk about that. He did a lot of fucking work in like 10 years to get the entire garden system up. So did he only create Balam Garden in 10 years, or did he create the entirety of like Trabia, Galbadia? I'm assuming only Balam, because the way you kind of learn about the dynamics of how different gardens work is that they feel very independent of each other, even they all do similar things.
Yeah, I mean, he probably went to each region or country and like, talked to someone who would set it up. I don't know if like Norg was the financier of all of the gardens, or just Balam. I'm guessing just Balam Garden, since he lives in the basement of Balam Garden.
Yeah.
What a creepy
I didn't know it had a basement. It kind of flies.
Oh, I love that. That's one of the
that's one of the best scenes 100% in the game.
Beautiful CGI cutscene of
my
Balam
gosh,
Garden flying.
Yes, just the whole battle scene. I mean, man.
The scene where Nita, remember Nita, the other guy, when he drives the freaking Balam Garden into Galbadia Garden.
Oh, is he the guy who Sid says like you're like no one notices you, but you'll have your day someday?
He's the extra he's the random NPC that's with them when they're getting their seed promotion.
Yeah.
And then he comes back. He comes back later as the pilot.
I forgot about that. There's a lot of cool moments. Like I think what bums me out about the story of the game is that the world they build is really enticing, like really captivating, because you have, the seed test is really cool. They have that, talk about cinematics, that invasion cinematic going into Dalit is amazing. Fun fact, the development of the game, while developing the game, Kitase, the director, during his downtime, when the very little bits of downtime he had, he would go to the movies. He watched a specific movie a lot, and it was Saving Private Ryan, because it was out at the time. And it really shows in that scene. Like it really, really shows that, like, that seems so inspired by the beach the Normandy beach in Saving Private Ryan. And he even quoted, I'll read directly from the interview here. During Final Fantasy VIII, I watched Saving Private Ryan, which left me speechless. It gave me a lot to think about the way we depict war as game designers, and about the possibilities of the video game medium itself. Could games one day take up heavy themes like that? And there's a special perspective and is there a special perspective or impact that only games can deliver? And that's where the interview ends. So like he ends on that really thought-provoking note, and then I'm like, are you going to elaborate? No? Okay, thanks. But very clearly, Saving Private Ryan was a big influence on that specific scene. Like it so much seems like that. But the first half of the game, like I said, you help Dalit fight back the Galbanian invaders. You find out they only attack Dalit to get to the radio tower. Yep, the big fucking satellite dish. And then you get tasked with helping the Forest Owls as the resistance group to Galbadia, who are currently occupying Timber, where the resistance group is based out of. You start off with a mission trying to kidnap the president. Like it's really cool. Like they have like you were saying, the really good pacing. Like they keep you interested in every step of the way, and then you finally you learn in Timber. You find out what the sorceress Edea, who you don't know at the time, is possessed by the sorceress from the future, Ultimisia. And then you've determined like that's your big mission. That's who you have to kill. Like, because she's clearly doing something wrong. Like she's corrupting Galbadia and things are going south. Now, another cool thing that Kitase talked about was, and this ties in with our love of the cinematics, the parade scene.
Oh gosh,
what a cool scene!
So good.
The mission of like the
music.
Yes,
oh my gosh,
that scene, and I think it does it effectively. I think, unfortunately, after that scene, which I believe that ends disc 1.
It does. It also is like the start of one of the biggest fan theories in the entire game.
Oh yeah,
is the whole thing just did Squall die there and just all in his head?
The theory that Squall died and the rest of the game's a fever dream.
But before we get to that, while we're talking about how good the parade and the climax there of fighting Edea and then like Squall like driving the car and busting through the gate.
So
I mean, but even not just that. I mean, this goes back to my point about just the pacing. one of the parts of the game that I think about the most is when you walk around the city with General Caraway, and It's got that music, and you're going around like saying up the plan. It's got that dun 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 dun.
I love that music.
And you're like, it keeps cutting away to like what's going on with Renoa and Adia.
Oh, and because like she's actually Caraway's daughter, and she got basically sent to her room.
Yes. And like just that whole setup scene, like just spelling out the plan. Like there's just this like excitement like building up in you to like, and the especially with the music, like it just like really makes this sense of like, let's do this thing that like I feel like few games have done as well as that moment in Final Fantasy VIII. Like it's just and then they send you going through a maze in the sewers. So that part maybe a bit of a misstep, but the setup and the payoff at the end, very good.
One thing I'll say about 8 is 8 has like some of the best moments.
Yes.
Its entire story cohesively I can't say is perfect, but like there are moments in this game that will stick in my head forever. Like one in particular, like one of the funniest moments in this game is during one of the Laguna flashback scenes. There's a point where he's back, Kiros and Ward are back in Galbadia. They just got back from their mission. And Laguna, being the goofball he is, just parks his freaking tank in the middle of the road and then proceeds to walk away. And you go through the cutscene, and as you're going through this entire section of Galbadia, you just see in the background the tank is just causing this massive traffic jam, and it's just getting pushed slowly across the road as the song "Under Her Control" is playing in the background, which is like one of the goofiest songs and catchiest songs in the entire soundtrack. And it's like that scene always like just sums up like Laguna to me, because it's like poor guy like is just living his life, and then he's just causing all this trouble just so he can go meet the hot lady that plays piano,
Julia,
who's actually secretly Renoa's mother.
Oh, yes, you're right. Which
leads to a really weird, spoilerish, odd outcome that could have happened, but that's besides the point.
Well, what I was going to say real quick before we go too far into Laguna and whatnot, the parade scene, Kitase focused on that a ton, and it really shows. We all like. All of you, both of you, gushed about that parade scene, and I love it too. And the reason they focus so much on it, and I love this. This is a quote, and I really love it. Kitase said, "I think a player's excitement and engagement in a game depends on how they perceive the threat they are facing." And that scene, the parade scene of you trying to assassinate the sorceress and ultimately failing, is meant to show you what you're up against. It's meant to instill fear in you as a player of like, holy shit, she just blocked a bullet from Irvine and then just threw ice, like giant columns of ice through Squall's stomach. Like, she's meant to instill fear in you. Like, this is the threat, that this is otherworldly. And it really does a good job with it. Like, playing through it now, I didn't feel that, but I don't blame the game on that, because I already knew what was going to happen. I've played, like, in all of my previous playthroughs of trying to replay it, I've gotten up to that scene a bunch of times. So it doesn't have that same emotional impact for me, third or fourth playthrough, but it doesn't change the fact that I still remember that scene when I first played it. I think you're right, but I think you really nailed it on the head, where this game, take the story for what it's worth, the specific moments, like, it has amazing set piece moments that stick with you for years. I still remember the Dalit invasion scene. I still remember the parade scene. I still remember like blasting off into space, which is insane part of the story, but like I still remember that.
Renoa was lost forever.
Renoa was lost forever. Yep. There's just so much, and I think real quick before we move on with this, the story overall I think is just really well told up until the plot twist of them all being from the same orphanage. Because once Squall gets knocked out, you find out you're all in a prison. You escape from the prison only to find out that they're going to launch missiles at the two different gardens at Trabia and Balam Garden. So you're trying to stop it. So half your crew is going to go to Balam Garden to try to warn them, and the other half is going to the missile base to try to stop the missiles from happening. And you stop the missiles. Trabia unfortunately gets mostly destroyed. It's still remnants of it are still there, but you do get to see the aftermath of it. But you go back and you go back to Balam Garden, and that's where you find out about Norg, that crazy thing, and he was the financier of the garden, and he has basically there's a civil war within the garden. People are loyal to the headmaster Sid, and people are loyal to the financier Norg, and you dispense that, you kill Norg, and you go about your way. But like you were saying, Tri, the pacing is really good. I think just up until that point, it's really where the game falls short for me. And there's still some cool moments after that, but
Esthar, the reveal of Esthar, I think, is pretty spectacular.
There's still some amazing moments, but I just think after that the story started falling flat for me. I think let me put it this way: up until the reveal of Orphanage, I feel like it was just blazing, firing on all cylinders. After that, maybe 8 out of 10 cylinders. And then by the end of the game, I was just 6, at least for me personally.
Yeah.
But I think Esthar was the 8 out of, it fluctuated a little bit, but Esthar was really interesting. But then it just, crazy story ideas, just throwing insane twists, what is it, the you find out all the monsters in the world come from the moon for reasons.
See, I think that's so cool.
No, it's a cool idea, but it's never it's one of those ones where it's just this is supposed to be a plot twist that was not earned again. I love the idea of it, but once again, it's they just tell you it, and you're supposed to be okay.
Well,
there's no repercussions for knowing that knowledge.
Yeah, they do tease the lunatic Pandora, when Laguna and crew go through it. Not that there's any knowledge of what it does, but when you see it again and then you see what it does, aren't there talk of craters around the world? I don't think that's a twist. Now that I think about, isn't that known scientific knowledge that there are periodic lunar tears, and that's where the monsters come from? I think that's known.
It is known.
Broadly.
It's very subtly hinted,
but they don't talk about it much. I think that's the issue. I feel like if they would have,
you have to go out of your way. That's the problem.
feel like if they would
visually, it's really cool, and I do think it's an interesting idea of how it does make this world feel more real, even though it has monsters. It's the monsters come from the moon. I don't know. I just think that's interesting.
No, it's a really good idea. I 100% agree with you. The way I would have implemented it to make it more interesting and to make the scene of the actual it's a lunar scar, right? To make that scene of it actually
the lunar cry.
To make the lunar cry scene impact more, they say it make it overt that monsters come from the moon from the beginning, and somehow just sprinkle it in conversation. You don't have to be exposition Jim and just say it all at once, but sprinkle it in more heavily throughout. So as the game goes on and you start facing more and more monsters, and they talk about the lunar cry more, where then when you go up to the space station, they could make a point the next lunar cry is happening, and then watch the cutscene, and you can see the ugly mass of monsters that are swirling and teeming on the moon, and then it gets sucked down into the earth. That would be so cool to see, because now you have all this context now of oh my god, I'm seeing a lunar cry now. Holy shit, this is what it actually looks like. Because until then, you understand what it conceptually is, but you don't understand what it looks like or what the actual emotional impact of it is. So I think this game just has so many amazing ideas, and they just don't execute on all of them. They execute on a lot, actually, which is why I think this game still works. It's just they don't execute on all of them.
Well, something that I would say that they would have earned by your definition. I don't know if you would agree or not, but I think they earned was the reveal of why, terrestrial communications don't work, and that that's revealed that's a plot point very early in the game, and it's ultimately revealed that it's because the sorceress Adele, they had to seal her in this thing in space, and the means they used to block her magic, just as a side effect, makes communications difficult on the planet. And that was how they sealed her away.
I mean, I get, because I guess the definition of earned is very subjective, I guess, but I would agree with you that is, because like you said, it's right away you hear all this talk about communication being difficult. I'll be honest, I didn't even remember them saying that's why communication was difficult. I didn't even know that was a thing. That's why.
Yeah. It was the machine that they used to seal her up. And I kind of forget, honestly, whether the reason she was such a bad ruler was because she was evil herself, or if Ultimecia was controlling
she
her.
Was evil herself, and they constantly talk about how they're nervous if Ultimecia decides to possess her, because then you have an evil sorceress and an evil sorceress from the future combining powers.
Now, something else that I've been thinking about this leading up to this podcast, and there's like one big gap in my memory that I'm like, okay, like I remember Estelle, and I remember she has the ability to send people to experience the past experiences of
Estelle,
other
or is it Alone?
Huh?
Is her name Estelle? It's
Alone. Yes. Yeah. See, I told you that she's the big gap in my memory. I'm like, okay, like you see her right at the beginning of the game. Like,
she's the first character Squall meets.
She's the first character you see, and yet she is a part of the game. She's so important. I know she's important, and it's always like every time I play the game, I'm like, oh yeah, that's how she works. And then like soon enough, like it fades again, and I'm like, wait, who is she related to? How did she know Squall? What was her importance? What was her mission? What was her goal? Why was she trying to do this? I don't remember.
So it's very unclear. Her whole thing is she's trying to send, because she's got that weird like telepathic ability to send people to the past. She's trying to essentially send Squall to the past to manipulate Laguna. Basically, because, spoiler warning, she was adopted by a woman named Rain, who Laguna comes into contact with after he
deserts the Galbadian army. It's after he deserts the...
Well, he gets lost during that mission.
Like, it was when he jumped off the lunatic Pandora, right?
Yeah. But she's the daughter of this a woman named Rain, who's a very significant character, but it's not immediately... it's never truly explained in game. You just have to kind of get the context clues.
Like I said, I recently played this, and this is one of the elements of the game, the story elements of the game I actually really loved. So, like, you are correct, Bill. What Alone is trying to do is send Squall and whoever else is with him back into the past to hopefully manipulate it, because essentially what happens is Alone...
I don't think she knows whether you can or cannot manipulate.
Well, that's what the thing is. She's trying to, but she doesn't realize it's not possible.
She realizes at the end it's not possible, but she's trying, exactly. And the reason why she's doing it is because she has this ability to do that, to send people back into the past and put stuff in there. She has been sought after by scientists in Esthar because of this unique ability. Basically, she was kidnapped for it. And so after she...
And she was also... I mean, the one thing I can remember is because of her ability, Ultimecia really wanted her because she could then go one step further into the past to cast the time compression.
What a weird villain. I'm going to cast time compression and destroy everything.
Time compression.
It's such a
goofy... Spelled with a K.
It's a cool idea, but so... she gets captured by like scientists in SR. I think this is after Adele has already been sealed, but the SR is still this like tyrannical government because they just wanted to get rid of Adele. So Laguna goes after her because, like you said, Bill, she was adopted by this woman, Rain, or is the daughter? I think might be the biological daughter.
No, she's adopted.
Okay.
She's not No, because Rain only has one biological child, but we'll get to that later.
Oh, she does? Oh, I don't know if I know that. Okay, well, hold on.
Oh, you don't know about
do you not
secret.
Know?
It's the other huge secret in this
Squall
game.
her son?
Yeah.
That doesn't.
Do you know who Squall's father is?
It would have to be Laguna.
Yeah.
That's like the other. It's never stated in game, but it's been revealed later.
That makes a lot of
sense. Well,
sense.
it is heavily implied though, because when you talk to Kyros and Ward on the
they
Ragnarok,
mentioned you look just like your old man, but you took after your mother more.
Yeah. So
no. He looks like his mother.
That makes a lot more sense. So because Laguna left Rain to go find Alone, he spent years trying to find Alone, and Rain died before he could return to her.
She died of childbirth.
She died and that explains.
Really? Okay, I don't think I knew that.
I think,
I forgot
that.
Either that or that's a fan theory that I hope
that's correct.
Sure.
Well, not because I hope that sounds awful.
Isn't Rain shown in the Indian FMV?
Yeah, but it's
no. Rain's dead.
Yeah,
though.
it's
like long dead.
shown in the FMV, but it's a flashback in the ending FMV because it shows when Laguna proposes to her, and then it fades forward to her tombstone. So it's very clear, like Laguna is remembering it. But
I think,
and I guess that's why Squall's at the orphanage, because Daddy was too busy being the president of Esthar
to go.
Well, that also would make sense why. That would also make sense why Squall has like no memory of his mother, like at all.
And also, did Laguna know that Rain was pregnant? It wasn't, like, did he know that?
I assume he did, because he does know he had a kid, I believe.
Well, he always considered Alone his kid. So I almost wonder if Laguna never even, because that wouldn't make any sense for Laguna. That would be completely out of his character to like know he has a kid and then never seek Squall out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that is weird, because like I said, I think Laguna is one of the most fun characters in the entire
best character in the game.
Series,
like the scene in the
and that is a little I guess cruel that But at the same time, like I don't know. Esthar was so secluded and isolationist, and I don't know what all the circumstances could have been surrounding that. Maybe he thought Squall was in good hands with Sid. I don't know.
If he even knew about him in general, like that's the thing.
I really don't. It wouldn't make sense.
Kyros and Ward, at least. I mean, let's be honest. Kyros and Ward are, they can put two and two together better than Laguna can.
They're a bit smart. Well, they're a bit smarter than Laguna.
Yes, they are.
One of my favorite scenes actually is before you even know who the president of Esthar is the scene in the space station where you hear the president is up there and he's in a spacesuit and he's like flailing around like, "Wait, don't take me away!" as they're pulling him off the station, and you don't know it's Laguna yet, but at the same time you're like, that's totally Laguna.
Oh, it's so funny. As a kid, I never even noticed that, but playing through it again for this, I'm like, oh my god, it's Laguna. Like I now that I knew it was, but I really should have seen it there too, because it's all of his personality traits in that one moment right there. Just the chaotic good energy. He's chaotic good. If we're going with D&D tropes, he's chaotic good.
yes.
But like but no, I really like that whole thing, because Laguna is the antithesis of Squall. Like everything that Squall isn't, Laguna is, and it works really well, because that's why Squall hates going back in time so much, because Laguna's this happy peppy person, and Squall's like, god damn it, just stop, get it out, like you're so like emotional, stop it.
Everything about Laguna is like everything Squall
hates. And that creates so many good comedy moments. It's really it adds to the comedy knowing that Squall is just face palming the entire time he's inside Laguna's head, just like being so upset at what's happening right now at that moment.
And Selphie's like, Mr. Laguna is so cool.
Oh, can we also talk about Selphie and her love for trains?
Trains.
She loves trains. Great. I love Selphie. She's like probably one of my favorite.
Selphie's fun. All the characters are fun. It just, they don't really, like I was saying, they just don't have enough going on for them. Like Selphie has the most out of all of them. Well,
her and Zell to a degree.
Actually, you know what? To their credit, the characters feel like the most normal people. Like Zell has a mom that he really loves in Balam, and he like talks about going home to Balam.
Can't go in his room.
You can't go in his room. Selphie came from Trabia Garden, and she talks about her friends there. And she, like, when you go back to Trabia, you see her still interacting like she's part of the school there, trying to help rebuild it.
And she's like destroyed by like their whole culture festival getting destroyed during the missile thing.
Yep. And then Irvine, he's a loner, and he kind of stays a loner, but it just, I don't know, there's just not enough character development for.
I think Quistis is the like, 1 year older than the student's instructor. That is such a Japanese such a Japanese trope of like all of these accomplished people being like not even 20.
Look at this 19-year-old who can like take down gods. I love it.
Isn't like Quistis's like a whole like plot point like that she like is in love with Squall, but Squall is like too dense to care.
That's how it starts. Yeah. That's how it starts, and then she finds out she has a line afterwards. She's like, "I thought it was because I had feelings for you, but it turns out I just wanted to be your big sister." Is that, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it turns into.
Forgot about
but
that.
I think though we should jump to the very ending of the game and just kind of talk about let's talk about the final castle, because we've jumped around the story here and there, but basically the final plan Ultimisia has is that she wants to compress time so she can be the ruler of all space and time or something like that. I genuinely don't understand what her goal is other than compressing time, but I don't know why she wants to compress time.
Yeah, I mean,
the evils.
Yes. I will definitely say that the whole Ultimisia thing, I mean, it really comes out of left field, and it is confusing. It is weird, but I also like that you can kind of like use your imagination a little bit with like how things led up to this point. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say. Maybe I'm saying this prematurely, but and this was a few years ago. I think around the time that the HD version came out. This was refuted by Katase, but I always enjoyed the fan theory that Renoa is Ultimisia.
That's another one, yeah.
Have you heard that one?
I've read that. The two most common ones are that she's Ultimisia from the future or the past or whatever, and then the other one is obviously the Squall is dead one.
Squall died, which that one I've never really read into that much because it never interested me. But the main reason that the idea of Renoa, because something we haven't really said is that Renoa does become a sorceress.
Yes.
Kind of unwillingly over the course at some point in the game. Or at least I think it was unwilling. I cannot. I cannot remember the scene in my head, but she does.
She ends up getting Adia's power just kind of by happenstance. And
That's right.
She gets some Adele's later on after they defeat her.
The whole
and so
logic of the laws of being a sorceress in this world are so confusing because it feels very much like, because they talk about how like when a sorceress dies, she has to pass on her powers to someone else.
Yeah,
it can't be to anyone. It has to be another sorceress, but one that hasn't awakened their own powers yet, or something like that. So it's like
some weird combo.
And I'm like,
shit.
so are you basically just forcing this like? Because every time someone becomes a sorceress, they become like ostracized by the rest of the world, like immediately. And
I mean, I guess they get to rule Esthar.
Like, there's a line in when the whole team gets back together after you get the spaceship and everything, and after you save Renoa, where like Zell makes a comment like, "Yeah, we're gonna destroy the sorceress," and then everyone's like, "Zell." Wait a minute.
He's like, "Not you, Renoa,"
and he's like, "Oh."
Yeah.
He's like, wait, oops, sorry.
But the main reason I always thought the Renoa is Ultimecia theory was interesting is because there is one thing that drives me absolutely nuts about Final Fantasy VIII. This bugs me more than the orphanage thing. What the heck is Griever? Why does Squall have a necklace or keychain or whatever of one of the final boss forms? Like, where does that come from? And the only thing, and once I heard that theory of Renoa is Ultimecia, I was like, oh, but that would make sense that like one of her guardians would be like this symbol that Squall had, and that she like became evil because she lost her knight, which like that's like a whole other plot point of like the sorceress's knight, and it's like, oh, like Squall dies, Renoa becomes evil, and like Griever is one of like that made that theory come together for me, and I was like, I subscribed to this, and even though Katase refuted it, I still feel it makes a lot of little things about my questions of Ultimecia and Griever like kind of come together, and I still enjoy that theory. I don't know if you all like have information on Griever that I don't understand, but it totally throws me that like they make this point of like, you name Griever. Like, oh, here, let's pause the action and you can enter a custom name for this lion thing that never comes up ever again, except, oh, it's one of the final bosses.
I always assumed it was supposed to be a guardian force or something that she's possessing. This is just a stretch on my part. I always assume that.
Yeah, but where does it come from? Why does Squall have it? Why does it reappear again? Like the whole Renoa's Ultimecia thing resolves the weirdness of Griever. I just do not know what the purpose of Griever is. Like that bugs me.
Purpose,
other than that theory.
The purpose was to give us a bitchin' boss theme.
Yeah, it is. I mean, every track in all forms of that final fight are just like, oh my gosh. Even in the final form, they have like all that long build up, that all like and then like they get that
the extreme starts playing, yeah.
Well, and then they get to the point where when it really picks up, they do like the traditional Final Fantasy like da 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 da. It's like, yeah, it's good.
Oh my god. Real quick before to kind of we should really start wrapping this up. We're at 2.5 hours. What I want to talk about to end is just Ultimecia's castle. Because the castle is a really, I don't know. I'm torn between liking it and disliking it. As a quick synopsis of what the final area and final castle is, you walk into Ultimecia's castle and all of your abilities, with the exception of attack, is taken away. And the way you get, so to draw magic spells, you can't do it. Heal yourself, can't do it. Use magic, can't do it. Can't even resurrect. Can't use limit breaks. Can't use guardian forces. Can't use items. Like, everything's gone. So you have to fight the bosses in order to do so. And what's kind of cool is that you can make it as easy, or you can make Ultimecia as easy or as difficult as you want with this. The more bosses you fight, the easier Ultimecia will be, because you have access to your abilities. So I believe there's like 7 or 8 bosses or something, like maybe more. I can, we referenced at the very beginning of this long episode, all the strategy guide. Let me count, and I can tell you how many bosses you could potentially face in Ultimecia's castle.
It's a lot.
It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different bosses.
I thought it was even more.
It's 8 bosses. If you want to fight Omega Weapon, that's 9, but that won't give you an ability back.
That's not even in the castle, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's
or am I thinking of another? Ultimate boss?
I'm fairly certain it's in the castle.
Okay,
I can double check. I'll flip again back to. I just closed the strategy guide, but I can flip back to it. Yeah, it seems like it is, because there's. I
think there's another ultimate boss somewhere in the world, isn't there?
I don't know. There's
this long shaft that you go down, right?
Are you thinking
somewhere?
of Bahamut, the deep sea research facility?
Is that Bahamut?
That's because that's where you get Bahamut. I don't know I think you have to fight him there too.
There's also Eden.
Eden, yeah, the boss that you get Eden from. That's who I'm thinking of. Which boss is that? Is it Ultimate Weapon? Is there an Ultimate and an Omega innate?
See, I remember that one because I got soft locked because of that. The elevator just stopped working. I got stuck.
Oh, jeez. I don't know. Well, so anyway, but you have to fight all these bosses in Ultimicia's castle, and as you fight them, you get your abilities back, and each boss gets progressively more difficult. Well, it depends on the order in which you fight them in. The first boss that you absolutely have to fight, because you can see them right off the bat, is a boss called the Sphinxor or Sphinxara. And the easiest boss, it only has 10,000 health. It's not even like a range. It's just a flat 10,000. It's laughably easy to take out. But the rest get harder, and you have to use different strategies and whatnot for it. So depending on what you do and how much you want to explore Ultimicia's castle, you can basically determine the difficulty of the final boss. And the final boss, like I remember I beat all the bosses beforehand pretty handedly. There's some difficult ones, but Ultimisia is surprisingly difficult. Did you guys remember that fight being fairly difficult? Like in a good way difficult, but it was challenging.
I mean, I can't really remember my first time, but like on subsequent runs, I definitely recall like abusing Irvine's best limit break ammo and stuff like that. But I mean, it's a long sequence too, so
a lot of different forms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good sequence. It's a good sequence of final bosses. But yeah, the castle itself, I suppose, is
more interesting than the boss.
Well, I mean, no. The boss is interesting, but like the castle itself is kind of like out of theme with the rest of the game. And I would be curious, like if they've ever talked about in some of those interviews that you've brought up, because there must have been a reason that they had for going like hard fantasy, with a castle with these like massive chain links that you like walk across, like to get to the entrance.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really different from the rest of the game that has a more modern, more fantasy modern aesthetic. And so that's weird, but also at the same time, I kind of like the final dungeon in Final Fantasy games to be a little weird and strange and sort of a lot of them almost feel like a place that couldn't exist. And I kind of feel like that's a recurring theme of Final Fantasy final dungeons. I was always like bummed out by like the mundanity of the final dungeon in 12. So like I do appreciate the sort of iconicness of this like sorceress castle that, there's like no hint of a place like that anywhere else in the world, or certainly not in the present time.
I think it works in this situation just because she's supposed to be not of this world. She's supposed to be from the future in this completely strange time, and plus you're in the time compressed world when you fight her, so you go to certain areas and like time is at different elements, like you're in the future in some points, in the present in others. It's a cool idea. It's a bit annoying to like walk around because like you can get Ragnarok again, but half the cities you can't go back into.
I mean obviously that's a disc 4 concern.
Well, but it's frustrating because normally
for saving data.
But it's frustrating too because like normally in the final area, like you want to be able to explore the world right before you go fight the boss. But really, there's you can explore the world before you get to the time compressed world. But it's like once you enter the Lunatic Pandora and you fight Adele, that's the beginning.
That's
the final gauntlet, pretty much. But it's a long final gauntlet. But I think we got to wrap this up. We're at 2.5 hours. We could probably go on another hour just talking about the story and different gameplay aspects of this. But this was a fantastic conversation about Final Fantasy VIII. I was not expecting, I knew we were going to go long, but I was just very happy with how much depth we went into with this, between the battle system, between the story and the world and setting. So the way I kind of want to wrap this up is I just want you both to give some quick final thoughts. It doesn't have to be really quick, but just some final overview of like why you think this game should be revisited today by maybe someone who hasn't played it, or maybe someone who didn't like it before and is trying it again for the first time in a couple of years. So we're going to start off with you to wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I think that there is a magic to the pacing of the Super Nintendo and PS1 era of Final Fantasy that applies to all of those games. Even though, some of those have better stories, some of those have less good stories, there's still like an energy that pulls and draws you through the game that I feel like modern RPGs don't have quite as much, and I can still feel it when I revisit those games. I still feel that excellent pacing, and regardless of what you've heard about the story, I still think that there's just so much energy to the game, and like you said, the world building and the soundtrack, and the gameplay systems, as flawed as they are mostly work out. And I still think it's a really important and really worthwhile game to revisit, especially because, like I say, that the pacing, I just feel of those Super Nintendo and PS1 Final Fantasies is almost unmatched in all of RPGs.
Definitely.
All right, Bill?
So the way I look at Final Fantasy VIII is a little interesting. Because it was my first RPG ever, I always consider it like a gateway RPG in a lot of ways. Like, if you can beat Final Fantasy VIII, it opens the door to so many other RPGs that at first would be very intimidating to the average RPG fan. Like, if you can figure out the complex systems of 8, any RPG after that is perfectly possible. And I think it's a game that should be looked at as kind of that starting point for the complex yet well structured, I guess, RPGs in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I wouldn't have thought of it as a recommendation for a starter RPG, but you're right, it does kind of instill in you some knowledge of some of the tropes that you need to look out for, and the ways that you need to investigate certain areas and wrap your head around certain systems and stuff like that.
I guess it's a good starter RPG in the sense that I think you have to preface it by saying it's not good if you're just mildly curious about the genre. It's good if you see all these amazing JRPGs or RPGs and you're like, man, I really want to try these out. I'm really, really interested. Then maybe suggest it up because they might have more motivation to get through some of the more difficult aspects of Final Fantasy. And for my final thoughts, I was very polarized when I replayed this game because I wanted to love it so much, and I'll be honest, I just did not enjoy my second playthrough of this. I love lots of specific elements, but I didn't enjoy my playthrough of this, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem with the game, believe it or not. A lot of times people would say, oh, that's an indictment against it, it's a bad game. I think there's a lot of elements that worked against it for my enjoyment on this one. One, I think because I was playing with a strategy guide and I've already played the game before. So I replayed this game again with a strategy guide because once again, the whole point of this series is for me to relive my formative years of Final Fantasy. And I'm playing it the same way I did back when I was a kid. So it's not the same strategy guide. My original Final 8 strategy guide has been torn to pieces from use, basically. So I bought a new one a couple years ago, and even that one, part of the map segment in the back has already fallen out. So I have to like tape it back in or something, or find some easy way to glue it. But regardless, so I think playing it with a guide when you've already played it is awful, because you are so focused on min-maxing everything and so focused on this and that, instead of just enjoying the story and enjoying the pace. And even though I have issues with the story, I do think it is something that's fun to play, and it's something that's worthwhile. And I think it's more interesting than the way I made it sound when I was giving it so much shit earlier on. So I had a real tough time with this because I love the battle system still. I really love junctioning. I had so much fun going into the junction menu and trying out different spells and this and that. But where it really bogged it down was the draw system, because you would see a new spell and you're like, all right, I guess I got to spend 20 minutes drawing from this one enemy now just to get 100 of the spell for each of the 3 characters. It's really tedious. Now, I do think the game mitigates this a decent amount by when it forces you to play with your non-main party. There's just an option. There's a literally command in the menus to be like, just switch everything. Summons, materia. I'm going with Final 7. Junctions, guardian forces, magic, everything. 1-to-1, switch it over to the other guy. And
that's a nice quality of life thing that you wouldn't necessarily have expected of the time that the game came out.
Exactly, and it's a lifesaver for the missile based mission, and so there's lots of great elements of this game. I think my ultimate opinion is really lukewarm now. It was my favorite Final Fantasy, and now out of the 3, it's my if I'm going between 7, 8, and 9 that I'm covering in this series. It's the bottom of my 3. Like 7 and 9 are both higher than that for me because of varying degrees. I don't want to say until the very end where 9 is for me, because then it'll kind of spoil where 7 is for next week's episode. But I can tell you, at least with this, 8 is at the bottom, and it's not because it's a bad game, but because I just have too many mixed emotions. I was too happy to be done with it this time around, and so I don't know. And like I said, I just don't know. Is that a product of already playing it and playing through with a strategy guide, and also understanding? I think, believe it or not, I think understanding this game a little bit more ruined the experience for me, because once I realized I didn't need to level up because everything scales with you, then I just didn't give a shit about battles. Like, there was no reason for me. Random battles lost all meaning to me, because once I had a really good skill, I didn't care what other spells the enemies had. Doesn't mean that you should. If you really want to like explore the game to its fullest, you should look at it.
Yeah, like I said, like I've never let that aspect hold me back from just taking the battles as they come.
And I wish I would have played it that way. So I think my final thoughts are, and then we can go into plugs and wrap up and all that other good stuff, is this is a extremely good and extremely flawed game. It is both at the same time, and at the very least, I would say it's worth playing. Despite all the criticisms I just levied at it, the reason it's worth playing is because it does so many interesting things that even if you end up hating it and not beating it or not getting far in it, it is worth looking at for the ballsy things they do, both in terms of battle system and design, story, world building. Cinematics is really impressive in this. Like, there's so many good reasons to take a look at this game that I have to recommend it. I have to, like, regardless of all those criticisms, it's worth looking at it just so you can learn about see if you like it, see if you agree or disagree with me. But at the very least, it creates something interesting, which not every game does. So I definitely wholeheartedly recommend it, believe it or not, despite all those criticisms.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can believe it because you dropped so many interesting points about it, throughout this conversation. That
definitely.
The fact that you have said you did not enjoy your replay it almost seems hard to believe, because you still overall like have such a tone about the game that like, hey, it's interesting, so yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm just petering off from what you said.
It's a game that I wish I loved again. I loved it when I first played it, and I really want to love it again. And maybe I will in another couple of years. Maybe I'll play it again without the strategy guide, not for the podcast, at my own pace. And I'm not trying to, like, right now I'm still trying to burn through Final Fantasy. I'm literally having to schedule out the rest of my next couple of weeks to figure out when is a good night to edit, when's a good night to Final Fantasy VII. And so there is an element of trying to min-max my time, for lack of a better term, to get all this in. So maybe I'll revisit it in another couple years, not for the show, just for me, and see where it's at. But let's wrap this episode up. We are almost 3 hours in, and that's exactly where I wanted it to be. That's not even sarcasm. I'm hoping for these episodes to be long, because that's what these Final Fantasy games deserve. I said it on the Final Fantasy IX episode. I did an episode on, when the podcast first started out 8 years ago, I called it Final Fantasy, the PlayStation Days. You can go back and listen to it. It's on the podcast feed. And I covered Final 7 through 9 in about an hour and a half. And that was when I was still learning the ropes of podcasting. So one of the things I've been trying to do with the show in general is, trying to fix my gaming sins, my podcasting sins of yesteryear, trying to right the wrongs. That's the expression I could not think of for some reason. One of the most common expressions ever. Trying to right the wrongs of my old podcasting habits and do something about it. So that's where the inspiration for the Winter of Final Fantasy came from. And so I'm so happy this episode is as deep of a dive as it is. So, gentlemen, thank you once again for joining me on this wonderful journey we went on through Final Fantasy VIII. Where can everybody find you? Bill, we'll start with you. What are you promoting? What do you got going on? And where can people find you online?
Well, first I just wanted to say thank you, Josh, for having me on the show. The show is honestly one of my biggest inspirations in starting my own podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And I guess to plug everything, you can find me. The easiest place to find me is on Instagram, The Barbaroo Games. It's a gaming blog I've been running for like 3 years now. But also, I have 2 podcasts. I have the Gaming and Collecting podcast. It is a gaming and anime-based nostalgia podcast where me and my sister Alex talk about different gaming and anime-related topics from our childhood, along with more modern perspectives. And then my other show, which is more of a side project, is a show called The 3DO Experience, where I talk about the ill-fated 3DO interactive multiplayer system, talking about the console itself and the company behind it, although that show is currently on hiatus at the moment.
And I was on the 3DO Experience, just kind of, I forget, what were we talking about even? I forget. I think it was just kind of like a general overview of it or something like that.
It was more kind of what was.
Yeah, what was. I love that. I love that show, man, just because it's such a niche era of gaming history that not a lot of people talk about. And I love that you are covering it and trying to not just cover the console, but also the company itself and diving into the games the company ended up making after the console kind of went the way of the dodo and everything. So, all right. Thank you once again, Bill. Thank you for the kind words. That really means a lot. I did not... I did not know that. That makes me feel really happy. So, Try, on to you. What do you got going on? One of my favorite YouTube channels of all time. Try, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the only place to find me is youtube.com/mylifeingaming. You know, we had a bit of a down year in 2022. Not as frequent of releases as we would like. But we're kind of feeling refocused and re-inspired for 2022. So hopefully you will see more content from us there. You know, we do documentary stuff. We do a lot of sort of approachable technical analysis, mostly focused on, you know, classic gaming type stuff, but oftentimes newer stuff too, or newer stuff with a classic sort of lens. We stream every Sunday night on the YouTube channel at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Usually just trying to maybe play a game that we haven't played through before, see if we can knock something off our backlog. And also, I'm one of the founding members of a old gaming website, a little old at this point, called The Backloggery. And that's a backlog collection tracking site. And I stream with them on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/backloggery. Stream there every Monday night, 7 to 11 Eastern time, trying to knock games off my backlog. And that's about it. That's where I am these days.
All right. And also, quick shout out to Retro Hangover, because Try is found right now. Retro Hangover is running the amazing King of Games contest over on their Patreon, which will eventually come out on the free feed. But if you want to hear it much earlier, and trust me, there's a lot of great content over there. Try and myself were over on there doing their King of Games. It's looking at the biggest games of 1992 and seeing how they fare head to head. And it's over on the Retro Hangover Patreon. Both of us are on there, and was a wonderful experience. I love doing it. That was one of my favorite experiences podcasting.
I was twice part of what is probably a super controversial twist on that.
Oh my! I listened to one of them, and I can't say anymore. We gotta keep it at a minimum there. But that will do it for this episode. For myself, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to support the show, please consider giving a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show. It pleases the algorithm gods, and it gets the show out into more people's feeds. If you want to support it financially, you get a lot of cool bonus content for that. Go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a few days earlier at better audio quality. For $4 a month, you'll get everything in the $1 tier plus 2 bonus episodes, which actually it will still be going on. I started a new mini series on those bonus episodes. Once a month, I am torturing myself by playing the My Arcade Gamer 5 portable system, which is one of those 220 games in one bootleg systems. Maybe I shouldn't say bootleg, because some of these games are legit. And let me tell you, I'm doing 8 games an episode, just so I don't, otherwise 1 episode a month, 1 game per episode, I'd be here for like 10 years. I'm not doing that. But I am going through this whole system painstakingly, 8 games at a time. And let me tell you, if you want to know what Curly Monkey is like, and its riveting sequel, Curly Monkey 2, this is the tier for you for $4 a month.
Ooh, I can't do one of that.
Oh man, you just wait. There's also such amazing games as Superhero. And what was another one that
the classic?
There is 4. I haven't gotten to them yet, but there's 4 different types of swimming games. Each one is just a different type of swimming stroke: freestyle, backstroke, breaststroke, and butterfly. Those are apparently enough for 4 separate games, 1 for each stroke. Go figure. So that is all happening over at Patreon for $4 a month. Plus there's 2 bonus episodes, like I said. So 1 episode a month will be me torturing myself through that, and the other one's going to be whatever is my fancy. Then for $5 a month, you'll get everything that I mentioned before: the $4, the $1, plus access to Still Bonding, which is a Patreon exclusive show where me and my friend Erica, the host of Monster Madness, bond over 007. And the episodes go as long as this, and we're covering every single James Bond movie in excruciating detail, and it is a ton of fun. So I really hope you go check that out. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And the final shout out, of course, is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. That's all I got for you for this episode. This is the middle episode of the Winter of Final Fantasy. I will see you next week for the final episode in the Winter of Final Fantasy. Bill, thank you once again for joining me.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Enjoyed it.
And I will see you all next time.